Hello and welcome to Radio Free Nintendo. It is May 4th, barely at this point. 2023. This is episode 821. I am James Jones. I'm joined today by Greg Lay.
Ahoy, everyone.
Who is back from watching a draft last week.
Yep.
Also joined by returning guest and former host of RFN, Dr. Jonathan Metz.
What's up?
And in chronological order for the most time since we've heard him, well, that's not technically true. We heard him a little bit last week. Our returning co-host and friend, Guillaume.
Ready to cast some pods, James.
Great. Awesome. How many weeks were you planning that?
Well, just a few days, actually, because this is actually a request. I got a message in my RFN board, kind of like private messages, and someone, Doomsday Donut, said, would you consider beginning your first episode back on RFN with the same quip you used to begin RFN episode 516? Ready to cast some pods is one of my favorite opening remarks you have made. Now, I'm not going to question that. It's a little bit weird to me, but I thought...
That's a very specific request.
Yeah,
I know.
No kidding.
And it's like, but I get it. I get it because,
it works.
Return to Monkey Island, there's like a very specific way that the actor who does Guybrush Threepwood says, Toasty, that's been living in my brain and Karen's brain for the past few months since we heard it. So I can understand. So I'm glad to be able to deliver that to Doomsday Donut.
Your audience demands.
Yeah.
We didn't by chance name that episode Ready to Cast Some Pods, did we?
I don't think so. Why didn't I keep that open? I just listened to it, actually. It did not go well the first time I did it.
That's fine.
I was immediately ashamed.
It did not go well, meaning it went exactly the way the show was supposed to go.
Oh, also, someone named Bishop wanted me to say, hi, my name is Guillaume Veillette. My voice is my passport. Verify me. So,
Great.
I'm sure there's no, that's a little bit weird, but, sure.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong?
Guillaume, I'm gonna go ahead and recommend you move all of your banking before this episode comes out. So, good God, that's worrying. All right, Guillaume, did you by chance listen to any of the episodes besides the call-in segment where you called us from a bus?
Well, yeah, actually that's the only one I haven't listened to. I tried to. So, I'm sorry, I might have screwed up, I guess, the first part when I turned on my mic and I didn't know that I was on or something. You might have heard, bus noises.
I cleaned it up in post. It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
I haven't heard the post-production version. I didn't hear it live, naturally. But it was very clean sounding. I'm sure there was all sorts of joy that went into making it sound that way.
That episode is one of the worst edits I've ever had.
But, for the end user experience, was perfectly fine.
I would estimate there's over 1,000 independent edits in that episode. Just little things of tweaking this and adjusting that and trying to fix weird time travel shit. That was oh my God, here we go again. Or caller would call in with the background noise of 1,000 suns exploding, and there's oh God, all right, let's fix this shit and get this over with.
But yeah, so I've listened to the episodes I missed, and there was too much stuff, too many actual references to what is Guillaume up to or whatever for me to deal with right now. I didn't. No,
that's fair.
Yeah, I know that. So John has this misconception, and he will continue to have it because he's not here and doesn't listen to email.
And he's old and will never change his opinion on anything.
He says I'm very much into owls, but it's kind of first by proxy, and it's not just owls. It's Karen is likes birding, so we always see a lot of birds wherever we go.
You tweeted a picture of you with an owl once, Guillaume. He's a geriatric old man. That's there now.
This is the point where I have to sort of interject with the fact that every time I miss an episode, which is pretty infrequent, John is under the impression that I am from Australia. So, I mean, there are bigger misconceptions, I guess, is what I'm saying.
I almost cut that out because it was so bad. And then I'm like, no, that would be inauthentic to the experience. I'm not going to save John from himself here. Me, I save from myself in the edit all the time. I clean myself up, so I sound like the smoothest operator in the world. John, I'm not.
Well, you don't know. Maybe John was proud of it, and you wouldn't want to.
Oh, he was definitely proud of it.
Cherished.
Look, you can save someone from themselves for something that they're proud of doing. Sometimes that's just being a friend. But this is a case where, like, no, he's going to do this again. There's no point in me trying to protect him this time because I'm just kicking the can down the road.
You know,
so
I think, aren't we like quite soon approaching like speaking of like, you know, sort of making calendar day, you know, like making a day to put on the calendar out of things like May the 4th. I think we're approaching the date that like the start of Perfect Dark is meant to take place in 2023. We're going to have John do Carrington again.
Oh, dear God.
When we get to that episode, aren't we? We definitely.
She's going to have like a Boer South African accent at this rate. He's just going to completely fuck it up. Honestly, I can't wait. It'll be perfect. We're going to have John Linden.
We might have a new Perfect Dark game this year.
We might.
I mean, it might get shown at least this year. You would think so.
As improbable as that is.
Yeah.
20 years on from the last one, we might get a new one.
And very unclear whether Rare will really have anything to do with it. They're not the primary studio on it. I know that.
Yeah, and it seems like they're pretty well busy with Sea of Thieves and whatever else they're working on right now. They've got another game. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah, I can never remember either, but it's that nature game, maybe?
Yeah. So, I mean, it wouldn't be surprising if they handed it. I mean, it's just like the Battletoads situation. Rare didn't work on that. They kind of did some oversight. Not that anybody who worked on that game is probably still around, so it's kind of a moot point. But like I said, we memed Microsoft into making a Battletoads game, so they'll do it. They don't care. Money's irrelevant to them.
Did it for the walls.
They might not. This might have. I mean, this is legitimately the possibility that they got Morbius into putting this in theaters a second time by making a friggin' Battletoads game in like 2018. It's entirely possible. People online just can't stop talking about Battletoads. Well, true, accurate, not the reason you think. Anyway,
I'm just thinking that do we need to like do some sort of like really high level broad based campaign to make people believe that F-Zero was bad, and then we can like cheat Nintendo into actually making it again? So is this the formula for getting things to come back?
No, because Nintendo is impervious to doing things that people want them to do.
Sony, the Morbius part of that, and Microsoft, the Battletoads part of that, funnily enough, the other two big platform holders apparently can be manipulated very easily, the most basic reverse psychology sort of techniques, but Nintendo a bit trickier.
I still can't get over the fact the meme about Morbius was people talking about their favorite parts being thing they obviously made up that there's no way in that it ever possibly happened, and Sony was like, this is our chance. We can put this back in theaters and now people will want to go. No! The joke was how nobody went! You insane people! Alright, so, emails. This sounds like a rough transition. It wasn't. Guillaume didn't do that in post. I did it with my voice. You send them to us, and we answer them. I promised you last week we would have 3 emails. Changed the format of the show and still delivered 3 emails.
Yep, I could practically see the Simpsons monkey paw animation happening with each one.
You're not wrong. There was a certain amount of that, but we did it.
Well, not being disparaging here, but I do feel like in another time, another place, we might have talked about the What About Games sound being intrinsic to the experience for a bit longer.
We definitely would have. Yes.
Yeah. I do feel compelled. The one that because you could. There's so many games with great soundtracks and sound design. You know that you could go on for ages. The one that really came to mind that I would have to point out, I feel like, is probably Celeste recently, because it's, the kind of game it is, this sort of precision platformer. It's a really kind of interesting marriage of this kind of relatively kind of emotive soundtrack with a game of that sort that's kind of, in some ways, is very kind of transparently kind of video gamey, because you're just kind of dying again and again and again and again, and he's trying to get these very precise things right. It's kind of interesting to go with something that's got more of an emotive feel rather than something that's like, I don't know, evocative of like arcades or comedy or, like leading into things like Super Meat Boy or something. But the way it works, I think, is that obviously, first of all, the music by Lena Raine is very good, but also it's like taking that sort of theme of, you're kind of screwing up a lot and like bringing it into the kind of the narrative theme of the game about perseverance and like recontextualizing the fact you're dying all the time, in that way. It's a sort of odd marriage that works, I think, very, very well. And I think, obviously, I play a lot of stuff portably and I miss out on a lot of like kind of, really immersing myself in the sound design of games, but that's definitely at least one that I could reference where it's like, no, that very much, enhanced the experience, and it's kind of a lot of what you remember about it years later, rather than like this particular challenge that like was really difficult or whatever.
And there are like you said, that could have been a whole segment if we wanted it to be. There are games that I actually think where the music, I mean, we joked about Xenoblade X, but legitimately the absolute nonsense of that music, like, I mean, literal nonsense in the lyrics, but like the musical decisions were also nonsensical. Sort of jive with that game in a way that works particularly well. So when you're wandering around this highly incongruent new LA, which is, there's literally McMansions and pools on a spaceship that crashed. And the pool and the basketball court and the McMansion are fine. And there's a whole nother reason why having a swimming pool doesn't make any sense for these people that I won't get into. And then you leave out or you just jump over the wall when you gain the ability to do that. That is right next to the pool, and a fucking level 100 T-Rex shows up and eats your ass. Like, there is a certain amount of the comedy of that game's music works really well when it pops up, because it's sort of, you go out into the fields, and a lot of the music there really fits super nicely. And then you come back to New LA and you're met with boom. Oh, yeah. And it's just like, no, this is, they know what they're doing.
Then an alien guy asks you to deliver pizzas for him or something.
That explode. Yes. And then it turns into a film noir detective. Like, it's so fucking stupid all the time. It is the dumbest game they've made, and that is an incredibly high bar.
I feel like I spaced out during like the reading of whatever email this is, and so I have nothing to add. I don't know what's going on.
We haven't actually read an email yet.
No, I was talking about the monkey paw and the fact that, the 3 emails were covered, but
oh, okay.
And
now we're just making up new ones.
He is critiquing our coverage of the previous email,
which
is
fair. I was kind of I'm terribly sorry I can't remember who asked that question, but they probably might have felt at one point that when it got answered, it might have been answered somewhat more at length than it was.
What would give them that impression, though?
I mean, it got about 7 or 8 minutes. Like, it wasn't super short, but yeah, you're right. We absolutely had more content we could have gotten out of that email.
It sounds like Greg missed a week, listened to the show, came back, and had some corrections. There's a long tradition on this show.
I know. This is. I want to make it clear. I do not come back and do corrections. I just soldier on like nothing happened. John comes back and declares it's a new Iron Man streak, and then misses an episode 2 weeks later. So there's different tactics for managing your return from an absence. I am amused when he just declares, it's an Iron Man streak now. It's like, no, but okay. Sure, go for it, buddy. Anyway, emails. Let's talk about some new emails. Emails go to rfn at nintendoworldreport.com. I could ask Guillaume to test if he's a robot, but it's fine. Well, if he's a robot, we'll figure it out, probably. That's rfn at nintendoworldreport.com. And Guillaume, since you're back, would you mind reading AG's email?
Yeah, sure. So AG writes, greetings all. With Tears of the Kingdom arriving soon, I want to ask about game prices. Tears of the Kingdom is $70 in the US, which is a quote-unquote big deal, TM. However, I live in the UK, and what I have seen is that game prices are nowhere near as fixed as they seem to be across North America. The impression I get from the US and Canadian gamers is that prices are the same everywhere. The game that costs $70 at GameStop costs $70 at Target, costs $70 at Amazon, etc. And you pay tax on top of the purchase price while the UK doesn't. In the UK, game sellers seem to be in a war of game prices. And as an example, here are some of the prices I am seeing for physical Tears of the Kingdom. Sorry. New title, Tears of the Kingdom. That's what it means though. Just a note, at the time of writing, $70 is about £56. So at Nintendo UK store, it's £59.99. At Game, it's $59.99. At HMV, it's $51.99. At Shop2, it's $49.85. And the Game Collection sells it at $49.99. Now this is a lot more varied and basically the same range of prices from other new Nintendo games in the UK. The question is, why does the UK have pricing variance? I'm not as familiar with the European markets, but my brief encounters there have shown that new games tend to cost the same across multiple stores, so I'm not certain it's the historic EU directive against MSRPs. We do get some quote-unquote next-gen games in the UK that cost £70, so about $88. However, these tend to be the AAA games that are half price within 6 months. Nintendo games infamously do not / barely drop in value over time. Are UK retailers more desperate for sales? Does the market expect aggressive salesmanship? Or is the North American market more beholden to fixed prices? To finance, gentlemen.
Yeah, well, I mean, my belief about this over the years has always been that it was a function of the fact that EU kind of directives over the years have had have been in place to prevent sort of price fixing, essentially. That there's not meant to be sort of any kind of collusion among the retailers themselves or with the retailers with in this case Nintendo, to about kind of getting the price at one level across the board. Now what of course isn't mentioned in this email, but I think it does kind of bear mentioning in general, is that this is one of the things that makes digital games like sometimes less attractive here. Because, the kind of price that Nintendo on the eShop will generally have the game at like the higher end of what's being talked about. So say, for instance, with, on their own retail store, or Game, the physical, I guess they're pretty much the last one standing, like the major video game kind of chain, for high street store. It will be that price. So it's always like, well, I would like this game digitally, but actually it's cheaper to get it physically because you can shop around and find, a better deal at, generally it'll tend to be an online retailer. And that's the thing, obviously, it's not a coincidence that a lot of the time, somewhere like Game is going to charge more to sell a game because they have premises. They have to staff them and provide it power and, pay the rent or whatever, all those kind of costs that, strictly online operations wouldn't have. They're just shipping stuff basically. Well, it gets passed on in how much they charge for games, and they probably try and, retain customers other ways, like loyalty programs and, the trade-in business, of course, that is at the heart of any, kind of, physical game retailer at this juncture. My understanding is just that, it is about, kind of competitive practices. And yes, even though we have left the EU, much of those regulations are still in effect. They've not all been repealed en masse or anything. It's part of the glorious voyage into, the next great age of our country. Upon leaving, those things were just essentially ported over into law, back into our own law for the time being, and then, presumably will be reformed in various ways in the future. But for now, those things still apply. And so, you get this sort of stuff where you've got variable prices. But I think that's maybe one of the reasons why the voucher program kind of never went away here. And it never went away in Japan either. But, in the US, it did, didn't it? Like, they did, Nintendo's online vouchers just, went away for a long time and coincidentally kind of came back in advance of Tears of the Kingdom coming out, and Tears of the Kingdom having this higher price relative to other Switch games in the US, which, as I've already mentioned on the show before, like Breath of the Wild was a premium game here already, so we're kind of just like harmonizing it with that. But that's the thing. For the vouchers for us here are a way for them to actually make the digital version of their first party games more competitive with these online retailers. Because you're getting it down to about not so much Tears. Well, I mean, it still does apply to Tears of the Kingdom because that is actually in the voucher program, even though it is a premium game. But like a normal game would be, kind of like $49.99 in pounds on the eShop, and then with a voucher you'd be getting it for like 42. Which is be much closer to the kind of prices that you'd see on some of these online retailers based here in the UK. So it's basically, there was a way for them, like, recognizing, like, we kind of have to price it at the upper end of what it's going to be with retailers out there, because they still don't seem willing to, like, completely want to go to war with the brick and mortar retailers anywhere in the world, seemingly, because obviously there's a whole bunch of costs, as I already mentioned, with brick and mortar retailers selling physical copies that don't exist for a digital version of the game. That really, those are economies that we, in an abstract sense, should be able to capitalize on, but we're not, because, they don't want to, like I said, they don't want to essentially declare war on these retailers. So you don't get that. They feel they have to price it at the upper end so they're not perceived to be kind of undercutting. But if you have this voucher program where it's like, okay, well, you're buying 2 games at once and all this kind of stuff, and you have to be a Switch Online member, then we can actually, get it so that it is in a more attractive area. So it's not just like way more expensive. You still might be able to get it somewhat cheaper physically, but it's at least close. And that's why I think it's been important that the voucher program has been omnipresent here. But I certainly think its re-emergence in the US would have something to do with the fact that they do have chosen to kind of make Tears of the Kingdom a premium game.
Oh, definitely.
But at the same time, it's like, have you heard about Switch Online? Have you heard about our voucher program? You can get it for a more reasonable price as long as you essentially commit to buy another game at the same time.
The specific, so I'm trying to find the specific relevant legal statute on the EU side, and I think it's Directive 98/6 EC, which largely deals with the pricing of commodity goods. So, like, it says, like, you have to price certain objects based on what the market like is a square meter of product. But then there are obviously components that deal with non-weight based products like video games. It technically speaking, an MSRP is legal, but it has to be done for the benefit of the consumer to prevent prices from going too high, essentially. Like it's as a price control, which is obviously the opposite of the MSRP. The job is to keep retailers from effectively saying, we're just going to eat all the margin to screw that other guy.
I'm not sure that's the opposite of an MSRP. Like in the States, and I don't know the history of the manufacturer's suggested retail price, but I think one of the purposes it might serve is to let the consumer know what is the kind of standard default price, so that if they see someone, let's say a retailer who's basically a reseller of that item in their local town, selling it for twice that, then they might say, hey, wait a minute. I wonder if I shop around, I might be able to get it for something closer to the MSRP. That's the way I always looked at it, as sort of a baseline.
I think that's some of it, but I do think there is a history of manufacturers looking at people who deviate from the MSRP in the downward direction and saying, hey, don't do that. You're essentially creating bad competition with other retailers.
Well, certainly you think of Nintendo's historic attitude to their, remember when they had, an entire generation of having a digital storefront that did not allow for sales at all, because it would compromise the perception of the value of the things being sold. Well, so it certainly would suggest that
price points
they are the sort of people that would be sensitive to the idea of retailers, even if they were just trying to sort of compete with each other. It wasn't really about Nintendo or anything, but in their zeal to try and get customers, they are somehow compromising the integrity, the perception of the value of Nintendo's goods. They wouldn't have been too thrilled about that, So yeah, I'm sure that it was a function of it also.
I adore the idea that you could have a situation with a product where Nintendo basically created a marketplace with the Wii Shop channel, where there were, I think it was 5 fixed price points, which means they created a shop.
It was the DSi that had the fixed price points, wasn't it?
Was it the DSi one? Okay, I thought.
There was effectively with Wii, there was kind of a few different ones that things tended to fall into, but I think you could pretty much. I think it was just didn't it have to just be 100-point increments kind of thing.
Correct.
With that,
I think that's true, but even on Virtual Console, there were aberrations. I think Sin and Punishment on the Wii sold for 900 points instead of 800 points.
Yeah, it was the import premium, essentially, wasn't it? It's well, this game didn't come out originally, so it's kind of paying an import tax. It's just you just increased the price because you thought you could. But
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was 600 as well, I believe.
The license in that case was this kind of essentially kind of cost more to get for it to be available on there, so it's going to have a higher price, because otherwise it was per system. It was the NES games are this much, Genesis games are that much, the Super Nintendo games are this much, and so whereas in Japan they were a little bit more we'll do it by genre. So if it's a RPG that's on Super Nintendo, well, that can be a few extra 100 yen, but they didn't generally do that with American Europe. It was more just the quote-unquote import thing, or the very occasional license thing. But DSi, I believe,
that would be, though, because the higher prices for RPGs was a lot of it was because of larger ROM, sizes for cartridges.
So it was kind of an echo of that, but the whole reason for that was not
as if those games hadn't already made back their costs,
I always saw it as a reflection of the popularity of the genre in Japan too.
Yeah,
there's a sense that they're just more valued.
is that, because it's like, no, we can charge this and people will pay for it. You know, that you've always got to, that's the thing you're always got to weigh when you're going to think about charging a premium. But no, with DSi, I believe it was 200, 500, 800. Yes. And there was maybe like a rare carve out for something like Shantae, which was abnormally large and sort of sophisticated for DSi, where that would be 1200 or something. But generally it was 200, 500, 800. That's it. Those are your tiers.
You could have a price set by radio button is the part that just makes me just delighted, because it's just it's what we would call an aggressive interface design, aggressively hostile interface design, but it works for that particular system because of how dumb the entire Nintendo DSiWare shop was.
I never actually kind of used the DSi shop, so
it's bad.
I'm not absolutely certain about that in terms of how it works. That's what I recall being said.
I can't fathom how bad the back end interface must have been, because the front end interface was atrocious.
So
yes.
Do we have an answer for why the prices are so consistent in North America? So, is it price fixing? Yes. Because
so the reality of the situation is MSRP's biggest job is that it's easier for the manufacturer to tell the retailers, hey, everybody's going to launch this thing basically at MSRP. You've got a fixed market, a fixed margin. You're not going to have people competing with you on price. And it's not explicitly a cartel, because that would be illegal.
Right.
But it is effectively everybody plays by the rules. Now, if you decided to not play by the rules, is there a cost that comes with that? It might depend on who you are. You might find your shipment in future games is diminished in some way or another. Like, you get less copies of them. And there's ways you can do that to sort of skirt anti-competitive behavior. You know, it's a finite number of copies, and we distributed them to the channel based on, a metric we invented, largely for the benefit of making a decision we already made. But I think that's pretty much it, is that the retailers also see the value, especially for our new game, in not playing with the price, because we know that games make the majority of their money in a very narrow band, very close to their launch.
Well, especially games, not Nintendo stuff, yeah.
Right. I mean, Nintendo's games have more of a tail, but a lot of third-party games in particular, like, they make their money in the first few days in some cases. At least their retail sales money. So the retailers aren't eager to cut prices on that phase either. What we've seen, though, is that retailers will very aggressively cut price on packaged product before or soon after that tail. They try to clear out space so they have enough space for the next thing that's about to have its boom period.
Yeah, but that's almost a different topic than I think what the email's getting at. I mean, like, in terms of the brand new, like, Tears of the Kingdom, as of this recording, isn't out yet. And so,
right.
It's true that in the US, you will not see very much price variation on a game like that's not out yet. It does happen. It's not that it never happens. And there are a handful of retailers who have a thing about kind of undercutting the MSRP. I mean, Fry's Electronics was a big one that chain shut down during the COVID lockdowns in 2021, I think. Or, in the wake of the lockdowns, at least. But there were only a handful of those stores across the country. Another one I've heard is, what's the one on the West Coast? It's similar to Fry's.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, Zach Miller talks about it, so they must have them in Alaska. But anyway, there's a couple places, and then online, some places will do it, but often, it might be different in other countries, but in the US, what I've always heard is the margins on packaged video games are very small anyway, so there's not much room to cut, and a lot of retailers use video games as not exactly loss leaders, but they want you to come in and buy the game and also something else, because they don't really make much money on the game itself, So that's one reason that GameStop and, even, department stores, Walmart and Target, they are often looking to bundle things with the hot games, or they're having promotions where they're trying to sell you other stuff while you're there. Cause the game itself is almost a promotion unto itself for people to come in and have to pick it up there. So they're just not making that much money on selling that stuff.
Well, for a couple of years now, I think that GameStop has started selling extended warranties on games, which is hilarious because they're also ready to buy your game from you in a month when you trade it in. Yeah. So it's like they're really going several times to that same well,
The other possibility, and I'm fairly confident I'm not sure. So in packaged video game world, I don't know if scan-based trading is a thing. And so I guess I have to define that term. Basically, the go-to for this one is power tools. If you go to a home improvement store and buy a drill, like an electric drill, technically speaking, I'm going to make it a Craftsman for this case. Lowe's and Ace are the only places that sell Craftsman right now. Lowe's didn't own that drill when you picked it up off the store shelf. Lowe's bought that drill from Craftsman's owner, which I think is TTI, basically as it was being rung up, and then you bought it from them as you paid. So they don't own their product, which means that the manufacturers can change the prices on the product at a whim, and Lowe's isn't out of any money. If Lowe's had to pay for the product before they took delivery, or as they took delivery, if the manufacturer adjusts the retail price of it, Lowe's is now out whatever margin they expected to get at time of acquisition. So it frees them up a little bit to handle, hey, we can play with the price as much as we want. Games is probably not something that's doing it, although I could see an argument for it because the price drop in a lot of third-party stuff that comes pretty quickly. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if consoles, where we see the same thing play out, where in Europe the prices can be a little bit more flexy. Scan-based trading is in play because every time they buy those things, they call home to the mothership to say this specific unit has been sold, and I would not be surprised if part of that was to facilitate that kind of transaction. There's other reasons to do it. There's a tax for you are actually taxed on your inventory. So if you're holding, $2 million worth of PS5s in a warehouse, you don't want to pay tax on that because it's part of your asset sheet. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if some of that is also in play here. But I don't know that that's in play here. There are industries I do know that that's in play. It happens in automotive space sometimes. It happens, it happens in tools. It happens in a lot of times when you've got a very expensive singular product that you're buying and there's maybe only one retailer that sells it, or there's a franchise op that sells it, is where you might see those pop. So there could be some of that in play too. I think ultimately, though, like what we said, is that the U.S. retail market chain has effectively conditioned itself to not do this. And so they don't. And that's it. That's the reason. Whereas in the European market chain, where the rules are different, they have conditioned themselves to do this. And I know that sounds reductivist, but that might actually just be it.
Well, and like I say, you've got those asymmetries between, the places that do have to cover costs of, premises and staff and all that kind of thing, versus, the purely online operations that don't have those. And they are able to kind of, come in and offer lower prices accordingly.
I wonder how many sales are done by digital only stores, so retail operations with no brick and mortar component in the US and Canada that aren't Amazon. And I'm excluding Amazon for a very specific reason. Cuz I can't think of who else I would buy video games from in that space that doesn't have a retail arm that they wouldn't want to undercut. Like GameStop for what all of its weird decisions, isn't going to sell the game for less on their website because the associated costs are lower.
Yeah, exactly. The same with that's what I said about Game over here. Like they're kind of locked into that, aren't they? You know,
I just can't think of whom else would be a player in that space for the market here. Like I don't have another player. Amazon is not likely to do it, largely because they have such a big stranglehold on the digital purchase of physical goods anyway. They probably don't feel like there's a need to price compete, which you know, be that as it may.
In Canada, like our retail chains are just about every domain, like every market that you can think of are just basically oligarchies. There's not enough competition. So that's just been like whenever I see weird situations with prices, I just assume like, well, it must be because our like consumer, like our whoever gets to approve like mergers and shit, they don't do their jobs very well and they're idiots. So, like just recently, like we already don't have a lot of cell phone providers, and they just authorized the merger of two big ones. And it's like, yep, I'm sure Canadians will find their their bills to lower in the next few months because no reason. We just hope it will, you know.
Well, it'll decrease redundancies in their operations, Guillaume, please.
Oh, of course, yes. This will be passed on to the consumer. Yeah,
but,
I'm sure.
Yeah. It will do that, but that does not mean you will feel it.
Yeah, but yeah, like Target tried quote unquote to get into the Canadian market and gave up before they even started. It seems like it seemed to be a really bad plan to come into the Canadian market. There's just not a whole lot. Like there's basically Best Buy, Walmart, Amazon, not physically, of course, but you know, like they're a big player.
Sure.
Yeah.
GameStop still hanging on, selling Funko Pops. But like the small chains, like sometimes like I will hear of I think like Video Games Plus.ca or something like that.
Oh yeah, I used to buy from them when the pound was worth something.
Okay, yeah. And it's like they seem to pop out of nowhere, and they're based in Montreal or some shit. And I'm like, really? I've never heard of this. And then they don't, like, their prices are not necessarily competitive, but they might have like copies of Bayonetta 2 for Switch in stock when no one else does. And I don't understand how that kind of stuff happens, really.
Yeah, this was like the mid-aughts, you know, when it was like £2 to the US dollar, like, and it, you know, even more for Canadian dollars, and you know, there's like DS games for very reasonable prices, and of course, you know, there was no region lock-in on DS, so it was like, yep, I'll have that. So, that was the good old days. But no, I do wonder if what James is talking about is sort of struggling to think perhaps of some equivalents in the US to the sort of outlets that were listed in the question there for the UK. Maybe, you know, because people can't do, you know, really, there isn't that space to do it, and also because, you know, running any kind of operation in the US is more costly. Right, you know, the economies of scale are more important if you're going to run a business across the United States than they are in the UK. So, you know, that's the other part of it. But certainly that kind of, you know, that kind of prevailing market culture, if you like, of this sort of like price competition not happening makes it harder for any of these things to have emerged in the years of, you know, online retail becoming a significant force.
Yeah, by the way, the store I couldn't remember earlier, I think is Fred Meyer. And I think it's regional, so I've never been in one before myself.
Yeah, it is. I've only been in them when I'm traveling. So like when I was in Seattle, I think there was like 2 of them that I ended up being between.
I never saw one when I was in Seattle, but I lived in the very heart of Seattle, and we didn't even have fast food.
God.
Yeah, a lot of chains just couldn't afford to have the real estate, and that, you know, it didn't make sense, I guess, for them.
Yeah. Actually, that might have been when I was in Portland. I can't remember. It was definitely one of my PNW trips. I just can't remember which one. Cool. I think we've covered it, though. I think we got this one.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Johnny, would you read our second email?
Okay. Sin writes, with Nintendo's successful push into cinema, the opportunity for a TV series seems even higher. We've already seen the glory that was Kirby Right Back Atcha and F-Zero GP Legend, but what Nintendo series would you like to see on a weekly schedule? Live action Eggplant Wizard, an anime Bulborb, or even a recreated Mario Party competitive show?
Oh.
More skeletons, please.
That's a nightmare.
Oh no, it's genius.
I gotta say,
I want to see Mario Party Masters. Based on those Lego Masters and whatever.
I mean, there was an actual live action adaptation of You Don't Know Jack in the early 2000s that basically tried to do all of the stuff, and it was not very good.
The way that, especially in the live show last week, the way that James talks about Mario Party, it makes it sound like, I've hardly played any Mario Party in my life, so this is what I have to go on. It makes it sound sort of like dangerously debasing yourself, much like sort of Takeshi's Castle or something.
Yeah,
so I'm assuming that, it's like, do you want to play, a particular Mario Party minigame, or do you want a scorpion put on your face? It's pretty much the same thing. So why not?
Maybe that could be the losing prize, is you have to play another round of Mario Party.
And that'll make for great TV. On my face, just do it.
Your choices are a scorpion or scorpion. I mean, you could do something where you've got essentially a bunch of, if you were going to do that route, where you come up with essentially Double Dare style mini games that are stand-ins for Mario Party mini games, and then just subject 4 contestants to, I don't know if it's an hour, because we're trying to fill time in a broadcast sheet. I would say every game would end up being about 2 to 3 episodes long with commercials. So
I can see that our mental images are very different here, James, because he went to Nickelodeon, and I'm just picturing Regis Philbin gravely asking a contestant if he wants to buy a star with his coins.
Oh God!
Well, you think about how they string out Deal or No Deal. It's like, what number do you want to pick? That's a random number box or whatever, and it's like, let's just try and really milk this for everything it's worth. I mean, somebody picked 8 the other day and it was bad, so I don't know. You could really get the tension out of that.
And at this point, it would have to be hosted by Dry Regis. So
yeah,
I did get that skeleton reference in there for you.
I love that people will call out numbers. It's like, you don't know what's in the fucking box either. Like, what is this man?
I can feel it. It's positive vibes. Positive vibes. That's what matters.
I know. So there's apparently very popular in Australia now, but also it comes from the UK. The Chaser. Does anyone know that show? But so I imagine maybe the format could be that, you've got 3 contestants playing against. Actually, isn't there a whole Mario Party game where it's exactly that? Someone plays as Bowser, and the other the people are trying to win against Bowser.
Yeah,
sure.
Oh, yeah, so there's a whole subset of those. Yeah.
Right, so you could have this one, scary looking dude who trash talks you like he's part of the show, and the 3 contestants are trying to somehow outwit him at Mario Party, which is, as I said it, I realized wait, that's not how it works.
I'm just thinking that Mario Party is the joy of watching Mario Party versus playing it is knowing that nobody's having a good time. And so the thing with TV, I mean, ultimately, I guess Survivor was a show about watching a bunch of people not have a good time.
Oh, yeah. Well, all reality TV it seems to be, because desperately much of it, especially not for a very long time, but it mostly is like, oh, look at these people debasing themselves for my amusement. That is whether people want to admit that to themselves or not, that is the appeal. So yeah, it's if you're gonna tie it to any Nintendo franchise, yeah, what playing what Nintendo game amounts to debasing yourself? Mario Party is presumably the only option. I don't know, maybe like some of the like WarioWare for Wii, where smooth moves, like where you had to just like put it on your nose like an elephant's trunk. I mean, that's a little bit that way.
Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out, like, how do we make sure because, like, the problem with Mario Party, well, that undersells it. The problems with Mario Party is largely driven by the tedium of it all. Like, so much, it's so much production to get through a game of it, and so many of the mini games are just exercises in repetition and variations on, maybe 5 themes total. And then ultimately at the end, the futility of it all comes into play because the game's like, okay, cool. Well, here's what we're going to do instead. I'm going to select the winner now and you're just going to, live with it. And that's the outcome. So
chaos is a ladder, James.
You're right. It is, but that ladder might be going to nothing is the problem.
Chaos is also a snake.
It's a ladder made out of snakes. I just worry that the format, like, ultimately, at the end of a game show, you're supposed to feel good for the winner, except for something like Survivor, where you're supposed to hate them. I feel like you don't come out of Mario Party hating the players, unless you were one of them. Then you might. Like, I watched all those Mario Party parties over at Giant Bomb before the cutting. The whole theme of those, and the reason it worked, is there's a consistent villain, and his name is Dan Reichert. Like, he gleefully took on the role of being the villain, and that's why that format works. And you can't necessarily do that in a game show because you don't have enough time to get to know these people, to know that this person is here explicitly to win, but also to make sure everyone else doesn't just lose, that they lose at a metaphysical level.
Yeah, that's
where I think that my comparison. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like,
because they have this essentially like rotating like kind of quiz masters on like that. Like so people do know them. The ones that
right.
Joe Public are going against, they know them and they play up to like. I haven't not seen that much of it, but it's one of these things kind of omnipresent in the early evening, late afternoon UK TV. So you
right.
end up seeing some. That's the idea. But I mean, there are. I know there's the whole writer's strike thing looming over US television, but there are other TV formats than reality TV and game shows and things.
Well, those are kind of sad to think about because that it's not going to be quality, whatever it ends up being. Like
right.
Whatever franchise that we choose for Nintendo here, like it's going to end up like today's equivalent of like that old Donkey Kong, computer animated show.
Wasn't that actually made by French animation?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Oh, it was a product of France.
And somehow, so I don't watch a lot of TV. I don't have anything coming in that's not streaming in my home. But while I was on vacation, I just was looking like, what do the Kiwis watch? And I did see some like Jurassic World animated show. And I swear, like, so, very tangentially related, I guess, to whatever those movies are, which I also haven't seen. But, they looked like the modern equivalent of, they were probably French. Honestly, it didn't stay long enough for the credits, but like they had that feel to them. And so I just know that, like, I would like to say, like, yeah, let's have like some sort of Pikmin TV show. I'd love to see that, except I don't. I very much don't, because it's not going to be good, and it's going to end up exactly like that, If we were to get a Pikmin show, it would just end up being a like mostly silent affair from a French studio who was already looking to export it internationally, so they made sure not to have a whole lot of voices. So it's, like they've got a long history of that with like Augie and the Cockroaches, or they're fucking, like, I'm sure that there has to have been a Rabbids TV show, right?
There was a Rabbids TV show. It had no dialogue.
Right. So it must have been
you've already had the Pikmin shorts that Miyamoto helped produce or oversee anyway. That would obviously as you might imagine, in that vein of silent entertainment. But yeah, it does seem like the kind of thing that's kind of limited to shorts, really, like that. I don't know that you could really scale it up beyond that in any format.
So I think what I would suggest is that if you're going to go this route, I would actually target it off of things that are more extensible, so that you could very easily take something, do what the Sonic movie's done, take something out of that Mario movie and say, I'm going to turn this component of it into a spin-off. And now
is this the Shadow? There's a TV series of Shadow the Hedgehog. Is that
there
what
sure
you're referring
fucking
to?
is.
Oh,
voiced by Idris Elba. Yeah,
yes.
Still, because he was in the. I've not seen it, but he's in the movie. So, but they got him for TV as well.
Disney's doing the same with a lot of their stuff. So the Marvel, the Marvel TV shows on Disney Plus are canon, unlike the ones that used to be on Netflix to movies. They're doing it with Star Wars stuff. Like it's synergistic.
Yeah, is Illumination owned or part of or in bed with any like desperate streaming service, like some
Peacock? Yeah, right.
Peacock.
Yeah.
Okay,
gotta.
NBC Universal. Yes.
Paramount's pretty desperate too, I think.
Yeah, but I mean that's NBC Universal fodder right out of the gate, because it's Universal Studios has the Mario, has the Super Nintendo Land. They've got the movie. And they own the streaming service, and they've got the development deal with Illumination. Like, it's to me, honestly, I'm not even suggesting this as like a joke or as like a, hey, that could happen. I'm suggesting this explicitly as, from a business standpoint, I'll be shocked if it doesn't.
Yeah, you kind of feel like if it doesn't, maybe it might be Nintendo's reluctance would be the only thing that stopped it, to be honest. But I don't know how reluctant they're going to be at this juncture now that, like the so far, by dipping their toes in, they've got, one of the highest grossing films of all time, not corrected for inflation. But right. It might have made them more willing to try these things, but there might still be some reticence to go full, scatter shot, like everything all
TV
at once.
is so much less lucrative than these kinds of box office returns.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not going to have the same prestige. I do feel like we should give some propers to the Pokemon TV show. I mean, it ran for some 25 years or something like that. Of new episodes being made. And I never really watched it. I saw one of the movies when I was in high school, which is really scary to think about. That's a long time ago, but
it's generational. Not Pokemon generational, human generational.
Literally a human generation ago that the first Pokemon movie came out. That was the one with Mewtwo, and it did not inspire me to watch the show or any of the subsequent
the first
films.
movie.
They did call it the first movie. I can remember. I've never actually seen that, even though I saw some of the TV show when it was on TV over here. It was on before school. Even though I was too old for it, even though I was probably 14 or something when it first came on.
I watched a lot of Power Rangers when I was definitely too old for it.
It's like, I still end up watching some of that before school because it's more interesting than, just breakfast TV. I don't know what breakfast TV is exactly like in America, but it's not terribly different than just like a sort of very, slightly trying to make the news just warmer, if you know what I mean. The evening
it's just
news
sort of
is very
the
stern.
blandest. They're just sort of like very bland cheerleader type people pretending to cook.
Yeah,
it's a lot of the morning
too.
shows. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, yeah, I will take, just Jigglypuff drawing on people's faces over that. So I definitely saw some of the anime, but I never saw the first movie. But I remember when it was being reviewed, sort of that part of it, the fact that it was called that, being very sort of sniffily responded to, of sort of, oh, this is very conceited, but at the same time, I'm sure it's accurate. There will be many more, and they were. Of course.
I distinctly remember a review that said, depending on your age, this is either a threat or a promise. It's like, well, yeah, you know what? You're right, because that movie's actually pretty bad, unsurprisingly, but it delivers in what the show was doing. But you're right. I mean, and we a lot of times we say, well, the Pokemon Company handles all this. When that show launched, there was no Pokemon Company. Mm-hmm. Pokemon Company was set up in response to the success of the games, the TV show, the trading card game. It became too much for Nintendo and Game Freak and Creatures to manage on their own. And so they set up an institute whose only job was to manage all that shit and said, you do it because you can stay focused on it. And producing 25 years of a show. And it's not like the show stopped. They've essentially rebooted it.
Yeah, I mean, they had to kind of reboot it all the time, right, for the new generations.
They hard rebooted it this time versus the soft
whole
reboot.
Ash is like actually won and calling it quits thing.
Yeah, like they've moved on. It was in a weird way like kind of shocking because I think it's like 2,000 or 3,000 episodes or something insane. Like that's like a crazy number of episodes. And it's not surprising because there's like 30 seasons. But it did well enough that it kept getting renewed. I'm looking it up now. See how many episodes there are. 1,233 episodes and 23 movies.
Fuck me.
Like, that's an no, it's not, now granted, in Japan, there are anime that will run forever. Detective Conan is famously at like 5,000 episodes or something insane. Because they just don't care. Like, we can just keep making this forever, people will keep buying it. Great.
I really hope that hell doesn't exist, because if it does and I go there, it's just going to be me like being forced to listen to like 300 episodes of Squirtle.
The Clockwork Orange chair, but with the Pokemon anime.
Well, I think hell would be it's the same episode over and over again.
Isn't that functionally what this is? Like, how many stories about fucking Squirtle can you really have, James?
I actually no. It's case closed. Our Detective Conan only has 1,000. Pokemon fucking passed it, despite it having a huge head start. Jesus Christ. No, I think the same episode of the characters making the same, like that same character making its same noise over. Like at least it rotates what Pokemon is featured, so you'll get different noises. Purgatory is you have to watch all of them and then you get to move on. Like your sins have been forgiven. You've seen all the shows and the movies. You may now advance beyond. But
can you get brain damage in the afterlife?
I'm going to say no. I'm going to say you can wish you could so that the pain stops, but no, it's there. You just get to continue to experience it. I think what would make for good actual television though is probably something that's, like unfortunately Mario and Kirby are really the go-tos because they can kind of have cartoon style adventures and you can just do whatever with them. I think Zelda's a little bit harder because I think they don't want to make Zelda funny. I think you might be able to do something in the Wind Waker style because the Wind Waker style games are a little bit more lighthearted and irreverent to some degree.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I mean, there was that whole thing. I'm not sure, how much credence to give it because I've not really examined it. But the whole notion that they had some talks with Netflix about maybe doing a Zelda show, but as soon as that there was public reporting on it, that kind of finished them off.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on. I mean, it's possible that Netflix was the initiator.
Oh yes.
And I could see Nintendo being like, well, we'll hear the pitch, and then if Netflix is out there leaking it, trying to make it, fait accompli,
it's a
they
definite
go like,
no thanks after that.
Yeah. All right. Oh, we can't trust you. We're out.
Yeah.
But I could also see the thing about doing a streaming show, like if you did a streaming spin-off series for the Mario movies, is that unlike TV or linear TV, where they want 26 episodes, for a streaming show, you can launch with 5 or 6 and see how it does. So you can take relatively lower risk, moves and kind of evaluate as a consequence. Okay, I did this. It sold well. Let's go ahead and make more episodes. Netflix does this a lot when they're doing, especially with foreign language stuff. Well, they'll produce a cartoon with 6 episodes. They won't even dub it in English. They'll leave it as subtitled. It does well, and then they'll say, okay, advance it to a 16 episode season, which means 10 more new episodes. And then while those are being produced, they'll catch up on dubbing because it's like, okay, it does well enough that we'll put the money in. You could do that with one of these Mario, with like a Mario spinoff. I don't know. You can go do the spin-off adventures of fucking Spike, I guess. I don't know. Somebody who'd be cheap to have do it, so you're not going to try to get Charlie Day in there again. But, I mean, Luigi would probably be the right call if you actually want to make somebody care about this thing.
I feel like Fire Emblem is good fodder for a series. I mean, you can even, this might seem kind of cheeky, but it might be compelling. You could even do it Walking Dead style, where you keep killing off main characters and introducing new ones. And that would be very consistent with the game series. And you can also fit in all the silliness and the character chatter and relationship building and things that people like so much about the games.
And you could just build it as it doesn't even have to be retelling Fire Emblem stories. It could just be a Fire Emblem style story that's new. It just carries the name around. Yeah, I think that's actually a really good play there. I was going to make a Xenoblade joke, but it's already anime. You're fine. We've already done it. Xenoblade anime exists. It's called The Games. God, there was one that I mean, all right, this is dangerous. Like a Punch-Out show would work really well. It's basically a cartoon already. I understand you might not be able to get away with as much in that format, but
well, unless it's for like, is Adult Swim still a thing?
Yeah,
I guess you could try to go for that market.
It's not happening.
Yeah,
not on that block.
That version of Punch-Out will never get made, I'm afraid.
No. Yeah. But if you're a little like wink and a nod about the fact that we know these characters are a lot and we probably shouldn't be using them, you could probably get away with it in that context. But it's very easy to make episodic. There's plenty of characters. You can pad in the story between fights, by allowing these characters that you meet to be engaged with in some meaningful way. I do feel like you could probably do a weekly or a serialized Luigi's Mansion show. I don't know that I'd want to watch it, but you could probably do it. It would probably be bad, but it could be made.
Yeah, maybe just, pretty much like he just makes you have it like a pilot that's like Luigi's Mansion, and then after that he just becomes a Ghostbuster, basically. So you have an excuse for him to go and solve a different haunting every week. And if it's like the real Ghostbusters cartoon from the 80s, you're going to have like a pop song interlude in every episode that I assume, doesn't survive these days. If you were to watch that old cartoon, I assume it's, the license has expired or something.
Oh, definitely.
I imagine more of a Scooby-Doo format. If you're doing Luigi's Mansion, I think you want that level of comic absurdity, and your main character is a scaredy cat.
I mean, the animated sequences that Next Level put into Luigi's Mansion 3 are really, really good, and they're really funny. And you could easily do that kind of Luigi interacting with ghosts the whole time. And with Portrait Ghosts, it's very easy to also do Creature of the Week stuff with it. Like, there's room there to produce effectively infinite content. Luigi ends up being inadvertently founding what is effectively an in-universe Ghostbusters, but it's very much not okay with it. Like, he just has to do it. Like, you have to come up with a mechanism why he has to make money, which is, of course, a key conceit of that game, to pay off something that he did bad. And then you just let it roll. And so he just has to keep doing it until he makes enough money, and then they can end the series, or he can do some other dumb thing that costs him a bunch of money and he has to start over again. You can just let the arc run forever. You just have to come up with a mechanism why he continues to go to haunted houses. And Kim, unless you just wanted to say every episode he inherits yet another haunted house from a dead relative. Like, I'm almost on board with that being the running gag. It's like Toad Messenger shows up with a certified letter and he opens it up and it's like, your great aunt died and left you this house. It's called the Haunted Mansion. Fuck again, god damn it. And off he goes, off to another haunted house.
I could see maybe Wario sitcom. That could work well, and like you'd have always the same sets, and you'd have like the cast of WarioWare characters. It would just be like whatever. Like, it would be not a continuous story. It would just be like an episode of the week.
Wario's The Office, where they're making video games. It's just an office sitcom.
Well, see, because I don't watch TV, I just went to like, oh yeah, and Waluigi just lives upstairs and shows up, and people are just like, woo, when he shows up. Like I got my references firmly in the 80s, 70s.
From Seinfeld. That's what I'm saying here.
Yeah, I was going Three's Company for some reason, but sure, yes.
Why do you live in our office? It's my house, and he just leaves out of the room again. I do like the idea of maybe you only see him for half of a scene every episode and then he disappears. Like, a lot of sitcoms have had that character, or maybe you never even see them. I want to say,
Home Improvement had the guy with, you couldn't see his whole face.
Yeah, Norm's wife in Cheers, Niall's wife in Frasier, they're the same. They just, they kind of like, I think at some point they just make so many jokes about this person that it's like, we can't live up to that. We could, maybe at one point we might have cast a real person to play this part, but we've just distended it so far from any reality. Like, we just have to keep them. Like, that is the joke now, and we just have to stick with it.
Yeah, there was one, I can't remember what the name of the show is now, where the character basically was in the closet, literally, not figuratively, and they just would just open up the closet door and talk to them, and then close it. And we never actually got to see them. Until I think late in the series, they eventually brought them out. But it was like, no, we'll just open it up and then we'll ad-lib a line into it and close the door and walk away. You could very easily just have, if you wanted to have Waluigi in there, which you shouldn't, because that character's fucking awful.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I have no idea what sitcom you're talking about, but I can definitely see Wario having someone locked in a closet somewhere. It's more of, an unwilling,
I would imagine it the other way, is that they've put him in there because they really don't want to deal with him, and so they just throw food in and close the door again. All right, he's good. I mean, could you do a Wacky Racers style Mario Kart series?
Yeah.
I'm sure you could, yeah.
You should.
Totally.
But again, hey, I want to put stuff on Peacock. That's very in the wheelhouse.
I mean, the sequence in the movie is a lot of Wacky Racers.
It is. You're right. It's pretty close. Oh God, that might be it. That might be the maximum. Oh well, there's one other possible maximum amount of money we could make here, which is an Animal Crossing series, slice of life style, where nothing ever happens, but they have little adventures, and they just take the characters from the Animal Crossing universe and try to extract actual personalities rather than just generic archetypes, and call it a day. It's just like, we're going to have these characters on this island. The cast is more or less set. We might change it every season, slot someone in, slot someone out. And they just kind of go about their day solving menial problems that they run into. And that's it. That should probably do pretty well, too.
Yeah, that could be very pleasant.
Yeah.
Why did I think that this actually existed already?
So there's an Animal Crossing movie. Yeah.
Right.
And it is very much that. Like, not a whole hell of a lot happens in it. It is basically just a tour of this island they have created. If you wanted to serialize it, you'd have to do more. You'd have to actually like have little problems that they're solving every week, but they would be extremely little problems.
2 words: mystery box. Right? It's an island. There's a hatch of some sort. There's there's a light comes out of it. We haven't come up with what's down there yet, but people are going to go nuts trying to figure it out.
That's true. What if when you open it up, it's actually
the friends you made along the way?
No, it's Tortimer. It's Tortimer. He's tied up in bondage gear. That's what's in there. You spent the whole season wondering. You're welcome. We're here. The old man's sex dungeon. You found it.
Thanks, James.
Honestly,
so we just went from Lost to Pulp Fiction.
News.
Great.
Yeah. Good. You know what? At least Pulp Fiction has a fucking ending. So,
Well, it has an ending that's like not chronologically at the end though, because it's non-linear.
That's true, but
it's not the best example.
Isn't the same also effectively true for Lost? It's also non-linear, so.
Oh well, it's somewhat true.
Yeah. All right. I think we've given Hollywood enough. I think we've given them enough free content that they can't produce right.
With the strike, anyway. They're probably just going to have to rip off our ideas, right?
I mean, just take our ideas and feed them to some text generative AI and call it a day.
Sorted.
God. Somebody's going to do that, and that's going to be depressing. Because it's going to be... There is the real possibility that happens one day, and it's funnier than the content that the writers were writing for that show. And we have to live with that.
Yeah, and when you get about like a whole bunch of a new season of television happens, and there's like all these new shows that are heavily based around skeletons, you'll know they ripped it off us.
Especially when they're really good for some reason. Like, why is this show so funny?
All the skeletons have 6 fingers.
Okay, sorry, just a brain bubble just now. Have Seth Rogen watch that crappy Donkey Kong Country cartoon and do an MST3K style commentary on it.
God, that cartoon, I don't think he'd survive. That cartoon is so fucking
that was another. I mean, it's not that this is uncommon with cartoons, but that was another one where it's just like, let's crowbar in another song, right? Like, I didn't see much of it, but I remember that much.
Yeah, it's atrocious. It's abominable is the word I would use for it. All right, well, email. We did email. That was email. We completed email. We're going to take a break now. When we come back, we're going to do some new business, so please stay tuned for that. We are back with some new business. And Guillaume, since you've been gone the longest, which is something I never get to say when we have a guest on the show, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and tell us what we know what you've been up to, but what have you been playing?
Right. What I've been up to is like, I've been walking a lot and some bike rides and stuff, but in a different place than I usually walk or ride bikes.
So I actually, on that point, heard from Xander what might categorize as a complaint or just a bemoaning that you were absolutely killing him in Pikmin Bloom this month.
Yeah, no, it's true. And it's, I'm kind of sad that like as soon as I got back, like there's no humanly possible way that I can walk as much daily as I did when I was on vacation. So it kind of sucks. Like I felt good about it when I was there, and then I come back here and I'm just not able to do the same distances with work and with like my familiar surroundings. Like it's anyway, I miss being on vacation, I guess is what I'm saying, but in a very convoluted way. So yes, I've been playing Pikmin Bloom, but thankfully it's not the only thing I've been playing. First, I wanted to mention, so I hope I remember this right, because that was a month ago now, but on the plane from Vancouver to Brisbane, I think someone sitting next to us was Brian, I believe, and I told him about the podcast. So I don't know. There's a possibility he might be listening right now. I think it's likely he might not be, because I brought my 3DS on vacation, and I started playing Ocarina of Time at some point, and I saw like he pulled out a Switch and started playing Breath of the Wild. And so we just talked a little bit like towards the end of the flight, because the engines I don't fly a lot. The engines create a lot of noise. There's not that much opportunity actually to talk to people. It turns out. But yeah, so like he mentioned that, and I might get the details wrong. Like I don't know if it was weekly or daily, but he said that he used to play like 10 to 12 hours a day, I think, to video games. But more recently, like he had kind of a life change, and like his life, basically, he's a chef who snowboards in his spare time, like all the time. So like he was in the Rockies, he was snowboarding and being a chef, and then going to Australia, which was home. But then like I assume he was going to fly somewhere else and snowboard and be a chef. So that sounds like a pretty awesome life. And I'm not saying that I don't think that our listeners have awesome lives. That's not what I'm saying at all. But my life is very much not being a chef and snowboarding. And so I'm not sure. Maybe Brian is into like really detailed and long conversations about the financials of Microsoft, or not Microsoft, but Nintendo. This is a Nintendo podcast. But like, then again, like maybe he is. So like if he's listening, I say hi, and yeah. So that was one thing. So but yeah, on the plane, I started playing Spirit of Justice because, of course, like many people, I availed myself of a lot of Capcom games because they were the only big publisher, it seems, who were putting their games on sale as the eShop was closing for good. And so I got all of their games, basically. But yeah, so Spirit of Justice is the last Phoenix Wright game that came out for, for the 3DS. I had skipped it, probably because I had my fill of Phoenix Wright at the time. But now I guess I was good to go for another one. But I think I remembered it being less well received. I don't know, James, if you can confirm that this is one of the weaker ones, but I think I had that impression.
So both of the 3DS games have people who have a reception that they're not as strong. I think this one might be received more highly than the first one, because the first one kind of felt like it was really just resetting the game. Like, okay, we made Apollo, and people didn't like what we did with Phoenix. We're going to bring him back. We're going to introduce this other character. We're just going to do things. But it had the benefit of having basically been a decade of resting time when it came out. So that sort of gave it a boost. This one, I think, is probably a better game in terms of the story it's trying to tell. It's certainly telling a much bigger story. But this is one of the things where the localization kind of makes the game not make sense anymore, because this is taking place in Tibet, effectively, not fake Tibet, but whatever. Yeah. And in the original, in Japan. And so it makes a lot of sense that characters will jump back and forth from the other, because while it's not close, it's a damn sight closer than having to include a trip across the Pacific Ocean, which is what the localization asks you to do. And I presume the localization for the French one still puts it in Paris, which makes this an even crazier trip. So actually, it might be shorter ultimately. But it's still a very long trip. So a lot of the plot conceits of like person was in one area and then in the other and then back don't make a lot of sense anymore.
So I don't think I'm far enough into the story to have seen that. I played the first 3 cases and then I needed a break because it was a little bit too much. The third case just went on, and I really wanted it to stop before earlier than it did. And So I think for now, I think this is one of the weaker games that I've played, but I think a lot of that is just, you can feel that they're kind of running out of stories to tell about these characters, or like the stories that they're coming up with are not nearly as compelling, or, you know, like these characters were interesting as you got to know them, and now you know them, and now they're just doing the thing that you expect them to. But that doesn't always make sense anymore, because why do people keep treating Phoenix Wright like he's some idiot asshole who never wins when he's literally never lost a case? You know, like at a certain point, like it's really stretching the what's the expression? Beggar's belief, but not that one. The other one, you had the suspension of the disbelief, you know, like is being stretched a lot. And so in this story, yeah, like, so he's in fake Tibet, and the persecutors, keep insulting him, and they're backwards as fuck, which might be problematic, I suppose. Almost as problematic as, like, aren't, like, foreign names funny, that you kind of get from them doing, like, these, you know, like, the puns and the names, like, that's always been part of Phoenix Wright. But when, like, oh, and these guys are foreign, and, like, there's kind of a suddenly, like, it gets a little bit touchy, you know, maybe a little bit problematic. Like, it kind of brings you back to, like, 80s comedies where, like, the Chinese guy was named, like, Hang Dong or something. It's like, it's no longer the 80s, guys.
I think if it was going... So sorry, we're going through another cycle of it. I think if it was going for the more, like, for lack of a better word, penile jokes that a lot of those did, it would be rough, but a lot of times it's just describing the character. It's no different than Frank Saw It, ultimately, which is a real Phoenix Wright name, and yes, he was the witness to the crime. Or was he? He was nominative determinism. In the Phoenix Wright universe, a lot of these characters, their name is basically just describing what their key character trait is. So it's probably not as bad as those movies were, because really they were just trying to make a cheap pun on somebody's name and putting some word for phallus in it. But yeah, you're right. It did feel a little bit weird at times when they were doing that, especially when they were really stretching it. Have you met the musician yet? I recall him having a particularly, like, "Are you fucking for real" name. That was a lot.
Yeah, so the musician, yeah, I've met him. His name is... Well, you have to see it written down and then sound it out for yourself, but ultimately what it sounds like is peace, love, and understanding.
Yeah, ultimately, yes. That's his name is that, which is just terrible. But how they've written it out, like, it's not even immediately obvious. Like, you have to kind of, like, you see it and you immediately know someone was up to no good, because you look at that name and you're like, that name didn't just happen. Someone is doing some bullshit here. And then you kind of, like, play with how you would pronounce it, and then you get there and go, oh, God damn it. Because that's also what they wanted. Like, they wanted you to have that. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, and there's one that was actually good. Like, I was like, oh, this is too much. But then I thought, like, well, yeah, they wanted it to be too much. Like, and also, it's acknowledged in the story, because, like, this guy is supposed to have amnesia. And so, like, when he names himself, he gives the name that was given to him by the prosecutor. And it sounds out, I can't remember exactly, because I didn't take a screenshot of that, unfortunately. It sounds like anonymous person, TBD. And so he says that his name is that, and, like, the TBD, like, he says it as if it's part of his name, but that's really the prosecutor who's like, well, we're going to call you this until we know what your identity is. So yeah, but
this is the guy. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. Like the whole, the prosecutors, like at a certain point, this stuff gets old. You know, Like the whole, like, the prosecutor is always like treating Phoenix like he doesn't know what he's doing. I find that it bothers me more and more as the games go on, because it's it's part of the shtick, and it's somewhat funny, but it gets a little bit less than.
I mean, he's famous at this point. Like, that's part of it.
Yeah, so it's not really believable, but also, like, it gets a little bit less and less clever the more they do it. And wow. Also, like, these games have a tendency to be overly wordy, and I wish that they were a little bit more concise, and maybe, like, then they could have jokes in them that have a little bit more punch to them. I don't find that the repetition and the very slow kind of ramp up in jokes like that, recurring jokes, to be all that effective. Fuck me. It just disconnected. Okay, am I back?
You didn't disconnect on our side, but I got almost none of that.
The lag was pretty severe, but yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. Anyway, so basically, like, the recurring jokes, like, they're not as clever as I wish they were, I guess. Like, the prosecutor will say, like, talk about Phoenix Wright's putrid brain, and then Phoenix Wright is like, isn't this a little bit too much? And then the prosecutor later on, like, your putrid rotten brain, and like, oh great, now my brain is rotten, and your putrid rotten zombie brain, and like, Phoenix Wright, like, what is this now? Now I have a zombie brain? And what is the cleverness here? Like, it's somewhat comical that there's, like, this kind of gradual increase in like the insults, but it's not ultimately something that makes me go like, oh, I should have screenshotted this piece of dialogue to share it on social media, which I'm not on anymore. But if I were, I would not want to put this, because this is not like a flavorful kind of piece of dialogue. There are some of those, but they're few and far between. I just want to read out something that at some point there's an exchange between Apollo and Athena that's pretty good. Athena is like, it must be so hard for Trucy, yet you saw how bravely she held back her tears. And Apollo is like, maybe you should practice a little of that bravely holding back your tears thing too, because, like, her portrait is crying, And Apollo continues, and by maybe, I mean your nose is running again. And Athena replies, enough with this nut shaming. And I thought, like,
nice.
Great. That is actually pretty good. So there are bits that I enjoy. So that's why I'm going to finish the game, but I needed a break after 3 cases. And so mainly during my vacation, I played through Ocarina of Time 3D. Which I bought when, again, the eShop was closing. And, again, my history with this game is that I did not have an N64. I played Ocarina of Time through the whole thing for the first time, on the Zelda collection, that came out on GameCube, with, Wind Waker. And, it was already dated by the time that I played through this game the first time, so maybe I don't have that connection that a lot of people have with it. But playing through it on the 3DS, I find that the same things that bugged me the first time that I played it still bug me, but it was still kind of a deeply nostalgic experience that game basically is extremely impressive, and I hope that I'm not just going to be talking about elements that were added to this version, this improvement, like this remake, but I was struck by how cinematic, like how much cinematic flair they managed to put into that game. And one example that comes to mind is one of the late game enemies is one of those soldiers that like they're basically just all armor, and they've got this big axe that they wield, and you can basically like set them up to destroy columns in whatever room that you're fighting them in, and usually like that's how you're gonna like get health back. But otherwise, like they hit hard, and
the iron knuckle.
Oh, is that okay? Yeah, that makes sense. So they're the iron knuckles. And like there's one such enemy after you've fought 2 or 3 of them that is being like animated by one of the witches in that. Sorry, what? Anyway, it's being animated by one of the witches that is the one of the boss dungeons, dungeon bosses.
You sound like you're huffing gasoline.
You sound like HAL 9000 when it's getting unplugged.
Great. Anyway, carrying on.
Wow, there was like a 3-second delay between Greg saying something and you reacting to it.
Yeah, well. So there's this whole, like, this scene where, like, he doesn't have, like, this piece of armor doesn't have the axe, realizes it doesn't have the axe, and, like, goes through this animation, like, why are my hands empty? Then just, like, you know, without looking, like, puts a hand in the air, like, snaps or something, and, like, an axe falls into his hand. And this kind of, like, cool little cinematic moment, you can just feel that maybe, like, Nintendo's teams were waiting to be able to do something like this for a long, long time, you know? And finally, they had the technology to be able to do that kind of cinematic stuff. And so that, coupled with, like, just the feeling of the temples have, especially like the early Fire Temple, has such vast rooms that, and this is not something that's impressive nowadays, because of course, like, we've got open world games and stuff like that, but it still feels impressive from a game that is this old, you know? Like, you could see that they were really pushing the limits of what they could do with the hardware, or maybe testing the limits of what they could do. And it still feels impressive today, even though I didn't play it in release, you know? Like, I'm aware that when this was released originally, this was special. You know, most games weren't like this. So, yeah, like, basically, a few things annoyed me, and I realized that I don't like dungeons in 3D Zelda games much, particularly because of the stupid small keys that I would always end up not finding in time. Like, I guess I would go through most dungeons in the wrong order, and so it just felt interminable, trying, like, backtracking, get the small keys to go back to the locked doors that I had bumped into earlier. So that I wasn't a huge fan of, but yeah, overall, like, I was still really impressed by Ocarina of Time.
Nice.
Are you guys back? Am I back?
You're back-ish.
It's just, yeah, there's a cycle of, you know, kind of either they get the slow Daisy or it just goes completely silent, and then it speeds up, and we get it, you know, we get the Cliff Notes version of what was said. So yeah, it's tough. I'm sorry.
It's tough. It's tough to converse with you. Sorry.
Yeah,
I didn't even realize you had changed to Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, no, this sucks, because I imagine that you guys would have something to say. Yeah, you guys would have something to say about Ocarina of Time, I'm sure, but I guess we're going to have to skip this.
I played it once or twice.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I will finish with this. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fine. I will finish with this very quickly. I stopped at basically an arcade at some point in Queenstown in New Zealand, and managed to play a few rounds of Mario Kart Arcade GP. And Mario Kart Arcade GP is a few rounds is just about as many as you want to play of that game, because very quickly you realize the limitations of that game and how not terribly creative it is. And I know that sometimes, occasionally, like on social media, like I'll see someone say, like, I wish that they had put those games on a Nintendo console. And I can see why Nintendo and Namco don't do that, because I think that very quickly we would realize that basically all the tracks are ovals that don't have much interesting going on in them. And that would kind of destroy I'm sure the value of playing those games in the arcade. If you were to buy the home version of them. So they're very slight, very arcadey, of course. Like, this is not unexpected, but we played 3 tracks, and I swear they are all the same, just different decor elements, and that was a little bit disappointing. So I think I'll stick with Mario Kart.
I remember we talked a little bit about this. Yeah, I mean, the arcade games are not the strongest, and I remember this came up several years ago, a long time ago, when James was complaining about the numbering scheme of the Mario Kart franchise.
It's still fucking wrong.
And, I feel like most people, if you've played the arcade games, I think most people are kind of cool with those being set aside. I didn't know you could just ignore bad entries in a series and say, well, they don't count for the numbering, because there's suddenly new options open up in the Rocky series right away. It's not just that they're bad; they're non-canonical. They weren't made by Nintendo, and I think they're kept at arm's length by Nintendo for all the reasons Guillaume described.
James is offended that the Super Mario Brothers movie does not consider the Donkey Kong Country cartoon to be canon, basically.
No, that's not the problem. It's that you can't fucking start numbering at 7.
That's more of a.
Only a sociopath does that when they're talking about their kills.
It's also completely counter, isn't it? Normally, series get ashamed of the fact that there's so many in them, and they drop the numeral, So, whereas in Mario Kart's like, no, actually, we've done a lot of these. We should start telling people. In which case, there's an argument to count the if more is better when it comes to them, then count the arcade ones and have a higher number. Why not?
This plays into a joke I tell every couple of years when I have some cause to mention Call of Duty on Twitter, which is rare. But I will go and look at how many Call of Duties they've actually put out and refer to whatever the latest one as like Call of Duty 28, which is roughly what they're up to these days.
Nintendo made the Mario Kart Live Home circuit. Why does that not get a number? Why does the fucking mobile game not get a number? If the Nintendo part is the outcome, then fuck it. Those should be 9 and 10 then. Let's go. Number the fucking RC car game. That's it.
Doesn't have design levels.
It's just, I think it's just because,
does. You designed the levels.
Companies and creators can basically title their stuff any way they want, and let's remember that Star Wars started with the 4th episode, quote unquote.
It doesn't mean we have to accept it.
Yeah, well,
it doesn't mean
Star Wars
accept it.
Became a New Hope when it got released in home media, and it's like, so whatever. They can do whatever they want.
We can push back.
James is just incensed by the Fast and the Furious franchise.
You know what? They at least do have numbering somewhere embedded in the thing.
Well, they dropped it when it came back.
Okay, so does Hobbs and Shaw count, or is it?
No, it's a spin-off. Nobody's saying it should count.
It's an arcade game. It doesn't count.
I just really hope that Nintendo announces at their not E3 Direct coming up next month that there's a new Mario game and it's going to be called Super Mario Brothers 5.
You know what? That's fine.
Do it.
Fuck it.
Even
Burn it down.
Super Mario World was not called Super Mario Brothers 4 outside of Japan. Japan was the only place that mocked it as such.
I think they should announce the sequel and call it 11 and just completely make people go, what the fuck did I miss?
Yeah, all the other ones did count. The numbers were secret.
We fucked up the numbers. It was our bad. We fixed it now.
This is actually a pretty great segue into Final Fantasy.
Okay. Great.
So, I've been playing Final Fantasy 3, and not the Final Fantasy 3 that I got for Christmas back in 1994, or whenever that was, but the original Final Fantasy 3 that was only released on the Famicom, and this would have been a really late Famicom game, probably like 1992, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
No. Final Fantasy IV was out in Japan before that on the Super Famicom.
Oh, you're right. They were close together, though.
I think they were close
together.
Was
April 1990.
But, I mean, because I was shocked in retrospect to sort of learn how early a Super Famicom game, Final Fantasy IV, that you brought to the US as Final Fantasy II was. Yeah. It was really quite early on, and I think it was the story goes that they kind of, saw ActRaiser, that was again a rather early Super Famicom game, and thought, oh wow, we're really going to have to up our game with the music on this, because because Shiro's done a really good job with that, and so it would have been presumably some months after ActRaiser, but not that many. So yeah, definitely sort of from 91. I think I want to say.
So 3 came out in Japan on April 27, 90.
That's not far from when the original Final Fantasy came out in America. Would have also been in 1990.
So 4 comes out in July 1991. So not even 15 full months later.
Yeah. Especially when you've got a sort of generational jump there, to a new platform. It's kind of crazy, to think.
Those were the days.
Indeed.
So I FF3 was the real FF3 did eventually come out in the West on the Nintendo DS as a kind of a 3D remake, and I never played that when I was very tempted. I played like a demo at E3 once, a 5-10 minute demo. But I never did pick it up. I can't say exactly why, other than I remember the reviews being pretty middling for it.
They were. I was interested. They were a little bit lukewarm, and I didn't know. I wasn't entirely sure how much of that was a function of the original game, the Famicom game. I had no kind of familiarity with that. I think maybe a little bit, because it's not, that they hadn't got to the kind of the cinematic bent, the kind of storytelling, that Final Fantasy IV would get to, naturally enough, when it was still a Famicom game, albeit a late one. And how much of that was the polygonal graphics and, the kind of, the new version on DS. So many people were like not that, kind of pumped up about that. Cause even when you got to the polygonal remake of 4, there was some of that, like, well, it's not, I prefer the pixel art kind of sentiment.
Sure.
When Evo, that would have been, comparing it to Super Nintendo pixel art that was more advanced, but it was a little lukewarm, and that kind of put me off. And I thought, oh, well, they keep remaking Final Fantasy games. They'll remake ones people like more, which they did, but then, after Final Fantasy IV, it just stopped. That was it.
I know they only did 3 and 4 on the DS, and that remake of Final Fantasy IV, which of course I played as Final Fantasy II in the early days of Super NES, it is amazing. I love that game. I think I reviewed it for the site back in the day, and I certainly played the hell out of it. And it's weird that I never went back and tried the remake of 3, which I've never played at all until just a couple of weeks ago when these pixel remasters finally came out on Switch. And this is the one I'd been looking forward to the most, because it is the only non-MMO Final Fantasy that I had not played at all. I've not finished all of them. I've finished many, or I've seen 99% of most of them. I probably only got about halfway through Final Fantasy II, but I played it, so the first time the original Japanese numbering scheme, sorry, this is quite confusing if you're not pretty familiar with this stuff, but the original Final Fantasy II, first came to the West as a PlayStation 1 port. And it was poor. It was a bad version of the game. It had a lot of load times, and it was very glitchy.
Yeah, there was a whole series of these, right? The sort of the Famicom, Super Famicom games on discs, and because the RPGs blew up on PlayStation, it's like, well, we had earlier ones. Play these, play them more than you did before. Because Dragon Quest was huge. But like, I guess they maybe felt like now that Final Fantasy was having this renaissance with 7, like, no, not enough people have, gone back and played these other games, but it just meant shoehorning them onto a disc in ways that weren't particularly very natural.
Right. There's also a pretty bad version of Chrono Trigger for PlayStation 1. Along the same lines. I think they packed it in with FF5, maybe?
It was with 5, yeah. It was called, like, Final Fantasy
Extreme?
Chronicles or some shit.
Yeah, that sounds right. Chronicles, yeah. So anyway, I didn't finish FF2, but I did play some of it. So FF3 was really my only true blind spot in the series. And I'm very glad I've rectified it. I've really enjoyed this. The Pixel remaster, it seems well done. There are a couple of odd performance problems, which you can read about in, NWR's reviews of some of the other games in the series. I think this is a very common thing to the whatever engine that they developed for these, but it hitches up every now and then. So you kind of lose a couple of frames and it's just like, what is this game doing that the Switch is having trouble with? But I think it's just bad programming, really. I would say the pixel graphics look very nice. I'm sure that I haven't done a side by side, but I think this looks pretty different and a lot better than the original game. They definitely made it look more like a 16-bit game, which is kind of I think the entire Pixel Remaster series, basically, they tried to give them a pretty consistent look. So other than Final Fantasy VI, which does have kind of a different art style almost than the other two Super NES games, FF4 and 5 already looked very, very similar, even when they originally came out. But what they've done with the first 3 games that were on the 8-bit hardware, that Famicom hardware, they basically turned them into 16-bit games. So they made all 3 of the first games look more like FF4 and 5. And then FF6 sort of stands alone because it's a very advanced Super Nintendo game, so it does kind of look a little bit, it's like a half generation ahead of all the rest of them. And I don't think they mess with the look of that one too much.
Is this kind of like we're going to make the game look like what you remember it looking like versus what it actually looking like kind of thing? I
have no memory of what this game looked like. This never came out when I was a kid,
Well, sure. But I mean, like, just kind of, okay, we can't just make the NES games look like NES games. We need to move them up.
Yeah.
To be more what people would
definitely
think they were.
I think they wanted to capture the golden era of 16-bit JRPG graphics, which is Final Fantasy 4 and 5, really. I think most people would say that. Or Chrono Trigger, somewhere in there. So, I'm very pleased with how it looks. It looks a hell of a lot like FF4, which is one of my favorite games ever. So quite pleased about that. And the music sounds similar too. I don't think the compositions are as good. That's probably not controversial. Most games don't have soundtracks as good as FF4, or 6, but, they're quite catchy. There's multiple overworld themes. I've really enjoyed what I've heard. It does have the problem. I'm playing this portably a lot, so quite often I'm not listening to the music. And that does diminish the Final Fantasy experience quite a bit. And that's on me. That's a choice I'm making. I've got other things I'm listening to, or I'm doing other things while I play. Maybe we're watching TV or something. It's not a show that I care much about, so I'm going to get in some Final Fantasy over here. So I'm not turning the music up for that. And that's definitely a loss, for me. But yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I think what surprises me about FF3 is that it's not just that they made it look more like FF4. The underlying game, and it must have always been this way, the underlying game is a lot like FF4. It's maybe a slightly more primitive version of it. And in some cases, it's a little more complicated and not as streamlined. But overall, it's a lot like Final Fantasy IV. To the point that, I guess, and I don't want to spoil too much of this because there are probably a lot of other people like me who never played this one and would consider getting it with these, remasters out now. I will say there's a lot of overworld and airship stuff, which is some of my favorite aspects of the series. I really like exploring. I like finding secret towns, that are full of mages, these very specific kinds of mages who sell magic that you can't find anywhere else, and they have all kinds of weird lore that they're talking about. So there's a fair bit of that, which is really fun. The dungeons are all really short, which I really enjoy because I don't want to have to memorize a pathway through there, in case I have to do it again later, or if I die and I have to restart. So I like that you can kind of get through the dungeons pretty quickly most times. And the writing is quite good. I mean, there's not a lot of story here. It's more story than in the original Final Fantasy, but not a lot more. It is still the Warriors of Light. It's very basic stuff. And it does make me appreciate some of the narrative advances of FF4, where, you don't just have generic characters who you can sort of change what they do and what they look like at will. And so they're all very interchangeable. In FF4, your main character, he starts out, he's a certain kind of character. He has a certain kind of personality. He has a lot of history and baggage and relationships with other characters. Some characters love him. Some characters are afraid of him. Some characters hate him and are trying to undermine him. And he has a whole arc as you go through the story. And a lot of the other characters also have their own arcs. They develop, they change. Sometimes their abilities change as they undergo certain events. And of course, people move in and out of your party depending on what's happening in the story. And so that changes also the way the game plays. There's parts of that game where you're relying very heavily on magic, and other times where you've got a lot of brute force, and other times when you have relatively weak characters with specialized skills. So you kind of have to do the battles in a certain way in order to succeed. And I love that about FF4. It changes things up. It never gets boring. It's always giving you new options, new constraints to work within and figure out, how do I make this work? And there's a lot to explore. And with FF3, you don't have the narrative stuff that, these characters, they're very bland. Like, your characters in your party don't say anything. In fact, your entire party sort of speaks with one voice, and the text color changes. So when your party is saying something to these other characters, and you might as well be silent protagonists. You never really have anything interesting to say. It's like asking them a quick question or something to kind of keep the text moving. But some of the other characters you meet, the NPCs, as they say, are okay. They have things going on. Occasionally a character will join your party and tag around and follow you. They don't help you in battle. They don't do anything, but they kind of hang out with you for a little while. You can talk to them. And then you'll get to the end of the cave, and then they sacrifice themselves to the monster, or, they activate a secret switch that only they knew about so that you can go find the airship that's hidden down there. There's little stuff like that, that is kind of neat. This game introduced the job system to the Final Fantasy series, and it's a mechanic that I first encountered in Final Fantasy Tactics on the PlayStation. Hell of a game, really fantastic job system. That version of the job system is more or less the same as the one in FF5. And so that is a more advanced version than what you get here in FF3. Very simple job systems. Once you learn the jobs basically you get them from the crystals, the main crystals that are kind of at the heart of the lore of a lot of Final Fantasy games. You encounter these crystals and they'll say, okay, now you can become a black mage, a white mage, a thief, a ranger. Cool. Each one of those can be leveled up independently. You have job levels that are separate from your experience levels. And I'm not exactly sure what happens when you get job levels because the game never says so. And I haven't checked the manual or anything. But that just happens naturally as you continue to battle. And generally each job will have one special ability that you can use in combat, whether that's you can use white magic or black magic now. You can steal, you can kick and attack all the enemies at the same time. These various kinds of things. And then that's about it. Oh, and it changes what equipment you can use. So you always end up with a ton of gear that you're hauling around in your infinite inventory that none of your characters can equip because they don't have the right job. And you can change jobs anytime between battles. And one of the interesting things in this game is that it doesn't happen often, but at 2 or 3 points throughout the story, you come to a certain cave that you need to fight through, or especially a certain boss that some other characters will tell you about. Oh, they're only weak to bows and arrows, or something like that. Only a dragoon can defeat this thing. And the expectation is that you will take that hint and make at least one, preferably all 4 members of your party into that specific job. Buy the equipment so that they're, not going out there naked. So they at least have the right kind of weapon that they're allowed to equip, and maybe even level them up and do a little grinding and get them up to a certain job level so that they're competent. And then you can go in and really take advantage of whatever the boss is weak against. Now that's optional in most cases. I don't think the game ever requires that you do that. It doesn't even necessarily suggest that you change people's jobs. It just kind of presents you with an opportunity where, hey, you're going to have a big advantage if you have at least a couple of, whatever in here. And that's just not something that I've seen other Final Fantasy games really do. I certainly don't remember anything like that in 5, which is a little more freeform. You can mix and match abilities from different jobs. You can't do that here. So this is a case where some jobs seem strictly better than others, as far as I can tell. Some are just like very special use case, and I don't really know why you would waste time building up levels for that job when, you're gonna end up getting in a situation where you have to change it anyway. Most of the time I'm keeping 1 or 2 magic users, 1 or 2 physical bruisers in the party, and maybe one person who has some kind of interesting ability like a geomancer who can cast free magic based on whatever kind of terrain that you're battling on at the time. Something like that. But there are a lot of jobs. There's probably at least 20 or 25 jobs in the game.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's really surprising how much complexity there is here. I mean, we're talking several dozen magic spells, a couple dozen different kinds of weapons, some of which can only be equipped by one job, which you might not even unlock until very late in the game. So there's a level of complexity here that is kind of surprising and frankly unnecessary. And I gotta say, it's classic Final Fantasy. I mean, a lot of these games have so many magic spells you will never use, so many status effects that you almost never see. And just a lot of little details like that. And it's like, you don't need to use this stuff, but you can. You can experiment if you get bored, or if you just want to try it out and see if you like it, see if it works for you. Go ahead. You can try that. You'll get tons of consumable items that you'll never ever use. Things to cure Toad, and the Toad status effect.
I remember the Toad effect being pretty frequent in the remake, though. So I would use the Toad potions for that. But doesn't that happen in the Pixel remaster?
There's just one certain section of the game where that happens quite a bit. But then you get past that and you'll never see it again. But you can actually, one thing I like about this, you can unlearn the magic spells, and then they go back into your inventory, and then you can have a different character learn them for free.
Oh, that's good.
So you never lose them, and you can actually basically exchange magic spells among the characters freely. So as you change jobs, you never feel like you're penalized for changing jobs, which is good. It doesn't always benefit you to change jobs, but you can mess around and experiment with it if you want to. So yeah, I've really been enjoying it. It is not the most memorable Final Fantasy game, but there's more to it than I expected for sure. And I have had a good time with it. I've played it for more than 15 hours now. It looks like it's probably going to clock in around 20. So it's not a super long game. At $18, is it a good value? Maybe. I don't know. I think the later games like FF6 is a great value for $18. It's twice the length, and it's a much better game than this. It's much more advanced. For these earlier ones, it's maybe a harder sell. And, I would probably love to pick up at least Final Fantasy II, since I've never completed it, and the Pixel Remaster, there's a lot of improvements they've made to rebalance it and make it more playable. So I'd certainly be interested in getting that one. I'm not sure I want to pay $18 for it, so I might be waiting for a sale on that, but I certainly would give it a shot. And, you know, if I hadn't played 5 on the GBA not that long ago, it's been 6 or 7 years ago probably, but it's fairly recent memory. I'm probably not going to go back through 5 again. 4 and 6, pretty tempting because I think they did a nice job here. They fixed the font, you know, a lot of the problems that people had with the Pixel remasters when they came out on PC, those have been addressed. Having them portable, they look really good. They sound good. I'm pretty pleased. So I'm certainly in the market for more Final Fantasy. They're probably going to have to wait until after 16. So it's going to be a little while, but, I'm soaking up the Final Fantasy right now and it feels good. It's been kind of a while since I dipped into Final Fantasy and it's still good. Cool. Yeah. Are any of you thinking about getting Pixel remasters?
I had.
I did already mention, you know, Final Fantasy V is my kind of target one because of the kind of it's what I haven't played, but it's still, you know, somewhat advanced, you know, as you kind of mentioned there, you know, it's a more advanced version of the job system, and it's kind of, it feels like it'd be a nice kind of prequel to like the Bravely Default experience of the job system, which itself came out of the 4 Heroes of Light game on DS that was kind of that came out of the Final Fantasy 3 remake, really, didn't it? Like that was, you know, the 3 remake, the 4 remake, and then the next game with that kind of graphical style was an original game, but very much that Final Fantasy 3 template of 4 Warriors of Light changing jobs, right? And that then kind of morphed into Bravely Default and all that. So, yeah, I kind of feel like 5 is the one that would interest me the most. And, you know, if Xenoblade just popped up, and I was looking for something in between, pre-Zelda, you know, and it could have been Advance Wars. Advance Wars got awfully close to filling that slot. It could have been Final Fantasy V, but it ended up being Xenoblade. But I'm sure I'll come back around to it before too long.
Because I worry that with Xenoblade and then Zelda, it'll slip my mind ultimately. But I don't know. It's I'm watching it, but I don't have the deep affection for these games that other people do because I didn't play them growing up because I didn't have a Super Nintendo and I definitely didn't get the first Final Fantasy. So I played them much later, so I don't have quite the same nostalgia.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird to seem like I have nostalgia for this game I'm playing for the first time, but it really does feel like that because it's.
I mean, you have nostalgia
do get
for the series.
That's some of the most powerful nostalgia. I'm sure I mentioned this on the show once about how, you know, eventually when it was, I found a Japanese copy of the game for a very, very low price. I played through Donkey Kong 64. Now, I didn't play it at the time because the reviews didn't convince for, you know, the very, very expensive import price that it would have been for me at the time. But obviously I did play Banjo. So, when I played DK64, it was so kind of evocative of playing Banjo for the first time because it wasn't the same as replaying a game that you had actually played before, but you know, the music and the aesthetic and all these things are so rooted in something you did play back then. It's this almost like your brain doesn't quite know what to make of it, you know? It's like, it is something from the past and yet, you know, it is also fresh to you. And that is a kind of quite an interesting kind of concoction. I mean, I didn't love the game overall, you know, I don't think it was as good as Banjo, but I still really enjoyed that part of the experience.
Yeah. For me, I played Live Alive recently, and I had kind of that experience, right? Where like, this looks phenomenal. It looks like a game I should have played back when it came out, but I didn't. And now I'm playing it, and it feels awesome. It's like this lost gem that actually plays great and looks great that I'm playing now, and it's exactly hitting all the buttons that to trigger like that feeling of nostalgia, right?
Yeah.
So that was pretty awesome. But and I do want to check out the Pixel remasters at some point. But I've been like, I've had the idea of going through the Dragon Quest games for a long time. I just don't have the time to do that. And now, so you've got the Pixel remasters. So that's probably going to go after that. Like it's going to be in the queue. So I don't know in how many decades I'll actually make time for them. And of course, like with, not exactly because of, Tears of the Kingdom, but I think that playing Wind Waker just made me, 3D Zelda crazy. So I've been playing like Ocarina of Time, 3D. I really enjoyed that, more than I expected, I think. And like I've started Majora's Mask 3D already. Because I know like the Tears of the Kingdom is coming out in like 2 weeks, but I'm actually probably going to wait 2-3 weeks to dig into it. So I think I have time to finish Majora's Mask. But yeah, Wind Waker, Ocarina of Time 3D, Majora's Mask 3D, like I'm on a Zelda kick that might continue. Even beyond Tears of the Kingdom. So we'll see.
That is going to keep you busy. Well, certainly I'll put out there, and this feels weird that I feel the need to do this, but these games are so old. I'm sure there are people listening who haven't played any of them. And if you've never played a Final Fantasy, or certainly if you've never played any of these, of the original 6, start with 4. Start with 4, and if you love 4, play 6. Play 6 anyway. Those two games, they're totally independent of each other, but they are two of the greatest games ever made, as far as I'm concerned. And I think they hold up extremely well. And I think almost anyone will probably find a lot to enjoy in those two games. 5 is a really good game too, but it is almost like it's almost like a direct sequel to 4, not in a story sense, but it looks and it plays very much like 4. It kind of in a similar way as this remake of 3. It's kind of like a mirror image of 5 to me in that way. But 4 is the reference point. It is the template for these games. And then 6 is its own unique, wonderful beast. So, 4 and 6 are the kind of obvious recommendations if you're looking to jump into the series.
Cool. Anything else you want to touch on, Johnny?
Nah. I want to hear about this Xenoblade DLC. I'm not going to understand any of it, but I want to hear it.
That's fine. So Greg and I both have completed Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed, which is the big story DLC for Xenoblade 3. We're going to talk about it from a reaction standpoint, not spoiler stuff.
Yeah, but it may as well make this bit very brief so we can get Guillaume and Johnny off to bed.
Yeah, and then if you want to bail out afterwards, you can, and we're going to talk spoiler stuff unrestricted. And this is spoilers for it, for 3, potentially for 2 and 1 because there's so much relevant material here. It's absurd. I mean, right out of the gate. All right, let's do what we did with Xenoblade Chronicles 3 to start with, where we both revealed our end game playtime to each other and baffled that we played the same game. Greg, how many hours did it take you to clear this game?
To clear it, I think I came in about somewhere over 20. I was I was over leveled for sure. There's some things that kind of went into that maybe we'll say for the non-executive summary portion of this, but basically, I was over leveled. The last boss wasn't too tricky, but then it was still some things left to do, and I tacked on a few more hours to get closer to 30. And now almost everything is done, apart from a few super bosses, which is more thorough than I've ever played any tranche of Xenoblade content before. But that's just the way it went.
Yep. So I cleared it about 27. I believe I'm at 33 now. So I have collected all the items. So there's the Itempedia, which I believe first shows up in this format in Future Connected, where basically, like, you have to find the items you can pick up in the field. You have to find a certain number of them, of all of them, and then essentially spend them to fill in slots in this book. There's the Enemypedia, which is the same thing, but enemies. You have to fight a certain number of them in each field they appear in.
Yeah, that made me think of Arceus, I have to say. You know,
it does.
Just the idea of like, well, you know, there's these enemies out there. You might have encountered them before, but if you beat them in battle a set number of times, then it's kind of saved to the encyclopedia of enemies. Like that it struck me as very Pokemon Legends Arceus, and I kind of liked it because it gave you a reason to think, okay, you know, I've got all this open space in front of me with a whole bunch of enemies. I don't want to, kind of just skip past things and fall behind the curve in terms of experience. But it gives you this idea of like, well, I'll fight these ones instead of those other ones, because I haven't filled those in yet. And there's like a little, coloured indicator above them. It's very quick, for you to make that decision, and just gives you a little pointer, a little suggestion, for like how to manage like what enemies to battle and which ones you might just skip past.
Yeah, and that's basically what it ended up being for me. Do you have the green icon? Well, you get to live. Do you have the yellow icon? Well, I'm afraid that this is the end of the road for you. And
the important thing about all of this in terms of the item encyclopedia, the enemy encyclopedia, is that now filling it in is, each sort of task you accomplish in that regard could give you these skill points, essentially. Things that, in the past, things that you would imagine being on a kind of skill tree, so it's not just experience points that you get from battle. It's not just experience points that you get from exploration, which, something that Xenoblade, was kind of noted for, the original game, that you didn't just get experience points from battle, you got it from finding secret areas, general landmarks, all these different things. Well, now you've got more skill points based around all these different kinds of tasks. It could be filling in the enemies encyclopedia. It could be filling in the items. It could be talking to people enough times in the community section. And it's just like you kind of build up this well of skill points, which then, so it's not really a tree per se. It's more like a kind of grid, isn't it? And you have to unlock sections of the grid by actually finding items out in the overworld.
It's similar to what Xenoblade 3 has with its skill things for the Ouroboros, where you can unlock skills that way, but it's much more of just a straight up grid. Like there's 3 sections, and
because that has a lot of branching and things, doesn't it?
Right. These do have some that have preconditions, like you have to unlock X before you can buy Y. And they may be in different sections, they may be in the same section. But essentially it's just they have a single precondition, and that one may have preconditions, but ultimately it's because you're buying the powered up version of the skill that you're already, you have to get up to the version of it just before this one before you can buy the new most powered up edition of this attack or of this skill. But yeah, I got all the enemies except for the super bosses, which is a lot because weather and time of day contributes to what enemies are in the field. All the items, I completed the community section, which there's a lot of people in the community section. These are humans that you encounter.
Yeah, and it's not just persistently talking to them. Some will require, like, certain quests have been done before you get to the point where it's like, all right, now if you talk to them a few times, it'll complete their community link and give you the affinity points that you can actually spend on your characters.
And it does tell you, like, if you open up the community tab,
it's very transparent in many, many aspects. It's very transparent. But I guess the real point of this is it just feels like the most sort of rich, involved, like, version yet of, like, the more you kind of go out and explore and kind of document the world, the more you can enhance your characters. and so not just in raw level, but in what skills they can use. Like and like I said, you've got these key items, which is like, and now you've got another, kind of gem slot to augment your character stats. Now you've got another accessory slot, or now you can open up the next part of the grid for their skills. It just really feels like combine.
They want you to explore.
It really fusing together the concept of exploring the world and building your character more richly than ever in these games. And like I said, it's kind of always been you go all the way back to the first one. I think that was something that it was praised for, that it was doing that in a slightly more kind of involved way than RPGs typically do. I mean, they're always about exploration and character growth. That's like, pretty much. But
it's nice to be rewarded directly for it,
exactly.
rather than so indirectly.
They're always kind of, somewhat like birds of a feather, but this is like really explicitly kind of codifying a link between them and making it more kind of multi-layered and rich than it's been. I think it's a really quite a nice system. I mean, I guess the biggest thing that it substitutes for from the main game is in the main game you had the heroes that were like jobs, to go back to Final Fantasy 3 and 5 and Bravely Default. The characters in the party could take on these different jobs, which you don't have in this one. And I guess the thing is, because it's much shorter than the main campaign, I didn't really feel the loss of variety that the jobs gave you in 3 that keenly. I think that's the biggest thing that was nice about the heroes in 3, the base game, is that it did help the variety over a very long running time. Because this is shorter, you don't miss it too much, and you do have the ability to kind of, ultimately you're probably gonna, especially if you played it as thoroughly as we have, you're gonna end up giving your characters everything, of course. But because you only have so many points available to you, or so many slots that you've opened up, you will make choices about, okay, what do I want which character do I want to augment first, or what sort of things do I want to augment first? It gives you some agency over the kind of growth of the character in a different way than the way that you had with the heroes in the base game.
I did a lot of tweaking and familiarizing myself with how I wanted to build these characters to maximize for how I'm using them. It does give you the ability to reset the stat point usage, which is nice. But you get that late. I found that ultimately, just to kind of get into a little bit more generalized, I really did feel like this game, or it is not self-contained. It is very explicitly dealing with the Xenoblade 3 world. It is basically where we expected they put it in the chronology. That's not really a spoiler. They basically said that in the trailer. And it does a nice job of filling in some gaps that existed in Xenoblade 3's continuity, especially when we talk about how the world is in the state it's in. And I can't really get into too much more than that without really spoiling Xenoblade 3. And it doesn't, 3 talks about why the world is what it is, because that's the primary motivation. This sort of talks about how we got here. And it also talks about how, how some of the key players get to where they are, essentially. And it does a nice job of filling that in. It also creates a lot of lore around the space of the worlds of 1 and 2 merging. Where in 3, we basically are just told it happened, and it was bad. Because you can imagine 2 worlds slamming into each other, not good. Not a fun, happy time. This really talks about I don't know if the mechanism is the right word here, but the ramifications of how, because by the time we get to 3, things have stabilized a bit in a very distinct way. But this talks about an era when things weren't so stable. Things weren't quite so regimented. Things were still being figured out, essentially.
And of course, the biggest thing is that you've got a essentially unique region of the world
yes.
that you've not seen in Xenoblade 3. So it is new, and yet it is also doing a lot of the things that the Xenoblade 3 world did with, it's like, okay, you remember this sort of environment from Xenoblade 1 or from 2? We're kind of merging them together, or, some elements. Sometimes it'll be more strongly one than the other, but there's some sort of touch from the other one applied to it. And certainly I think this is most evocative of stuff from 1 and, kind of touches of 2 in the environments. But, a lot of it is going to reminded me of playing the first game, even though having not replayed it in any form, that was 12 years ago.
Right.
So it's a kind of, get to touch on this idea of like a kind of nostalgic sensation that your brain processes in a slightly different way than usual kind of nostalgia. It is, is really going to bring it out of you at times because it's so directly kind of evocative of something from a previous game. But at the same time, it is different. It's new, because the worlds have been fused together and, it is a new game and stuff. So it's an interesting kind of sensation that it draws out of you when it triggers these memories. But, in a somewhat different way, different context. I think I'm a little bit divided on the notion of like, would it have been better have I played Definitive Edition of the first game more recently? If I'd revisited the second one more recently? If I'd played Future Connected and Torna, which I have not, even though I own them? All of those things, I kind of wondered about how much more I would have enjoyed this if I'd been able to freshly. I can only assume there's just quite a vast range of stuff that's just gone over my head,
I definitely had that feeling with Xenoblade 1, where there was a moment where the party looks out there and they talk about it's the site of the giant, when the giant was imprisoned.
Oh yeah.
I won't go into who the giant is or why that's significant. But that area is in this game, and the party looks at it, and those that don't know comment on how weird it is. The one that does is like, is basically having war flashbacks. It's like,
there's a lot of that with they call them affinity scenes, in this, but I guess like heart to heart they've had before. It's a bit like that. It's also a little bit like the sort of flashbacks in Zelda in Breath of the Wild, just finding. Yeah. It's another thing to find. It's another thing that gets you those skill points, is finding these affinity scenes where it's some kind of, there's something in the distance that people like remark upon or whatever. So, that's another kind of cool thing to explore and find. But I do, for as much as I kind of, you could only almost imagine how much was going over my head, I will say when it's triggering a memory that is kind of distant and you've kind of forgotten it, but it comes back, that is powerful in a way that it wouldn't be if I'd played Definitive Edition when it came out a few years ago, or even more recently than that. So in some ways, I'm kind of happy with the trade-off, because some of those moments were very, very effective as it was, where it was almost like, recalling something from so long ago that, you really had, it kind of left you. But now it turns out it's not gone. It's still there.
Yeah, there's definitely some of that. I actually felt like this was a nice. It's. I would argue Torna, while not totally self-contained, because coming out of 2, your relationship with the characters drives a lot of how you react to Torna. As I've said in the past, the big bad of 2, one of the big bads of 2, well, both of the big bads of 2 are all over Torna, all over the place. They're in there constantly. And in one case, his particular brand of evil hasn't really come to pass yet. So you just seethe every time you see him. And it's just like, oh, there he is. Fuck that guy. And the rest of the party's like, oh, it's great to see you again. And I'm like, fuck not. Fuck this guy. Fuck him forever. But ultimately, you could play Torna first if you really wanted to, and then play 2. I think it would diminish both of those experiences, but it's viable. you could not possibly play Future Redeemed and then go play Xenoblade 3. Because it plays off of an understanding that you've beaten 3 and that you've seen what there is to see. The role of the counselors in this game is relatively slight compared to how much they're around in 3. But understanding what their role is, which this game does not really talk about, because again, it assumes you already know.
The consoles we're talking about.
Yeah.
That's Skeksis' friends.
Yeah, this game doesn't really explain what they are, and in fact, you really only see them a handful of times. Although they are, knowing what they are and understanding what they're trying to do in the world is really sort of core to then understanding why things have spun out of control in the very particular way that they are currently spinning. And it also helps contextualize some of the thinking that is dominant in the world of 3 by the time 3 comes around.
Yeah, so that's the thing. I mean, I've not played Torna, so I don't know how long that would have taken me if I ever had played it. I imagine
it's comparable.
I imagine I would have done it, but yeah, I was going to say, I think it seems more like perhaps the reason why this isn't on a game card of its own, or it probably is more to do with the fact that it is more dependent on having played 3 first than Torna was. I think that's the bigger difference seemingly between the two than just, this is less substantial, or, as a game. Because, I mean, I don't complete RPGs that often, because they are so often very long, and so I thought, right, this is a nice length. This is, really good.
I mean, it's short compared to Xenoblade 3 as a whole, but I mean, I'm done at this point, and I'm at 33-ish hours. The only thing I have left to do is kill the last 3 super bosses, and that's just not happening. If I did that, I would do the equivalent of platinuming the game, but it just isn't going to happen.
I can't imagine I'm going to go. I've virtually exhausted everything. There's a handful of things in the enemy encyclopedia, a handful of things. Oh no, actually the items are done now. And the community's done. So it really is. It's mostly just those, maybe a couple of enemies and the super bosses. So, and I've never done the super boss stuff in previous Xenoblade games, but
I took down 2, and they were both nightmares. And then I took a sniff of the third one and was like, nope, this is not going to happen. And then I went and just looked at the last 2 and was like, oh my God.
I've never come this close to actually seeing such a high percentage of any piece of Xenoblade before. I think it's obviously, first of all, because it is more manageable. It's a kind of nice size of game to try and, go thorough on it, but also because it's so transparent and so thoroughly documents everything and is kind of rewarding you at each step for finding this thing or, kind of talking to these people or whatever. It's just kind of prodding you to do it. Well, not necessarily prodding you, but kind of encouraging at least, without because oftentimes it's, entirely optional sorts of things, but you're always thinking well, this is going to help me improve my characters, it's going to help me stay ahead of the curve with the battles, so let's just keep, talking to NPCs, keep finding this stuff, and because you're doing it in a kind of smooth fashion, at each available opportunity while you're first kind of mapping the environment or going through an area, that it doesn't feel like it's like, okay, I've done all this now and I'd have to completely retrace my steps and go from scratch and to go to all these places that I didn't quite see the edge of. It was basically after I'd beat the final boss, the only thing I had to do to complete the survey of the environment was there was one thing I missed where there's a path. If you kind of jump down this thing, it kind of takes you around the edge of a particular area of the environment. I saw a few places I hadn't seen before. That was it. Because basically it'd done such a good job of kind of encouraging me to, feel my way through the whole place as I went that, I didn't have this feeling of but I'd have to go. All these other places I've already been, or it makes it smooth to be thorough. And I think that's a really kind of great quality to have.
And even like hidden items in the field, like chests and relics, it has a lot of tools to help you find them, because of course that's how you unlock the things to give yourself more skill slots.
A lot of the times, they're going to be in chests and stuff.
So they want you to find this stuff, unlike other Xenoblade games where they'll hide them and be like, there's an indicator around here, good luck. There's a number of tools they deploy to try to give you the ability to get it. I mean, I think it just kind of gives some last thoughts before we let these guys go, and then we can dig into some plot things. Yeah, I just really enjoyed it. Like, I burned through it in about 4 days in 30-ish hours. Like, I mean, granted, most of that was a weekend, so like I had a lot of time. It was just nice to see more about these worlds, really. And Xenoblade is fundamentally really good, it turns out. And telling a short story like this game does lets it kind of move the action along really quick. And they're good at making characters. And they made a bunch of new characters that are fun.
There's definitely, I think there's definitely some. It's nice in some ways to play, a chunk of Xenoblade where, things do move a bit more quickly on the plot development side. I think that is nice. I mean, there's definitely times where it also does feel a bit rushed. Like, you just look at the basic premise of the game almost could have been Xenoblade 3 instead. Like,
right.
We talked about this with the trailer. Like, it does seem like almost this could have been an idea for what Xenoblade 3 was. And at some point it's like, that's too, dependent on prior knowledge of the games.
Right.
We don't want to alienate people. We want to make something that obviously is not self-contained, but that people who are just coming to the series for the first time or have a very dim, not particularly robust, like, working memory of the other games can still enjoy on its own merits and tell something that's more of its own story. So I think that was a perfectly wise decision, but the scope of, like, the plot here could easily have been widened out into a longer thing. Easily. There's so much, like, it's dealing with. Like, it does feel a little bit rushed here and there, and a little bit like, okay, well, they're not gonna spend the time to make a DLC add-on 80 hours long and have all this plot development stuff, but, like, they could have done. Like, there's enough. It's not like stretching out time relative to the scope of the kind of premise of the game to fill that 30 hours. If anything, it feels, fast. And, I think, like I said, on the odd occasion, it's like, okay, could we maybe have, like, learned a little bit more about something there? But for the most part, I think the relatively quick pace is refreshing, and it just, to me, it contributed to a feel of, like, it lasted a good length of time, it was satisfying, and you still had all those sort of Xenoblade trappings of this, rich, beautiful world with beautiful music and this, always audacious scale that's just a hell of a lot of fun to explore.
That's kind of where I'm at. And because of its length, you basically are always, even if you're in the same area, exploring new zones for the most part. Which in Xenoblade 3, like, you can get to a spot where you're exploring the same area and just digging deeper and deeper on it. And that takes a little bit of it out of there. Alright, cool. I guess that's gonna do it for this. Like I said, if you want to stick around, I don't know if we would put the music before it or whatever. Like,
that's it. We may as well do the farewell music and all that. And
then I wanted to go ahead and do a quick pitch. Next week is the retroactive part 2 for Wind Waker. So if you've got last call for comments, get them in. You can put them in the talkback thread, or you can email them to us, and we'll try to include some from there in our talk next week. Again, email is rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. Greg, what is our music to close out this?
Well, I thought it's going to be just a matter of a few days by the time this goes out until Tears of the Kingdom is finally launched on the 12th. So, Had to have something from Breath of the Wild to kind of get us ready. We've used a few things over the years, not surprisingly. It has been 6 years since that came out. But for me, obviously, Breath of the Wild is a non-linear experience, so everybody will have a little bit of a different kind of sequence, I guess. But for me, I didn't really mess around too much with Hyrule Castle until I was ready to take it on, and that was really the fear of like, okay, the game is, this is the final kind of, the home stretch, as it were. So I don't think anything for me could encapsulate the end, the home stretch for the long wait for the sequel to Breath of the Wild than this song, which is the exterior version of, Hyrule Castle. With the kind of militaristic version of it, which then like segues into a kind of quiet organ version when you're actually like in certain parts of the castle. But yeah, this to me is just really, really evocative of that time playing the game, kind of getting into the castle area for the first time. And it's for me, when you talk about the original Legend of Zelda theme, the overworld theme from the first game, it's like less is more. Like, I know everybody was upset at the time when Ocarina of Time didn't have it for Hyrule Field. Like, that was a big thing, and then that's why it's in Majora's Mask as the overworld theme, even though that is not really a fit at all, if you ask me.
It's not Hyrule.
No, exactly. So that never really made sense, but it was just to make people happy because they weren't happy that it was absent from Ocarina of Time. But I always think, like, if you hold it back and then deploy it at a key moment, that's perfect. That's the way it really should work. And this is just such an example of like, when you're coming towards, for me, the end of a long kind of run and you kind of build up to it and then you bring it in. It's like, yes, this is it. So, I couldn't be more apt for my money. I really checked as much as I could that I hadn't used it before. I was kind of surprised I haven't, so apologies if I have, but it's still suitable, so whatever.
There you go. All right, Johnny, thanks for joining us this week.
Yeah, my pleasure. And just to be clear, after the Zelda music, there will be more Xenoblade spoiler talk. Is that the plan?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. That's not for
Probably
me,
not a lot,
but that's for someone out there.
I would say Xenoblade After Dark, but it's more After Dawn in my case.
Yeah, so probably not a lot because I think we're both tired, so maybe just a few minutes. But there's just a couple things I wanted to talk about.
That's fair.
And so we'll keep that pretty. This episode's already long. We'll keep that pretty brief. But yeah, so stick around if you've already cleared a future redeemed. But yeah, Guillaume, it's good to have you back.
Yeah, in a way. Hopefully, I don't know. Hopefully, like I kind of, this was not optimal, but that's the thing. Like maybe this was the last opportunity we ever had to talk about Ocarina of Time. So it's sad, but I guess it is what it is.
It is relevant to Wind Waker. We will obviously, in terms of as its predecessor. I imagine that some things might come up next week.
Yeah. All right. But on that, unless you're going to stick around for the Xenoblade talk, it is time to end the show. Bye, buddy.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, so this is the last warning. We're going to get into spoilers for just Xenoblade writ large at this point, but specifically we're going to talk about the stuff in a future Redeemed. If you haven't played that yet, or if you've got sensitive to other Xenoblade-ish lore, this isn't going to be that long because we're both tired, so you're not missing that much. But if you have... if you don't have the context, you really aren't. You're just going to hear us throw shit out.
Words without meaning again.
Yeah, but if you have, stick around because there's stuff in here, and there's a pretty good chance there's stuff you missed because there's stuff I missed.
Yeah, and I imagine the stuff I got was a subset of the stuff you got.
Right.
Bearing in mind that you've played more of everything than I have.
So right out of the gate. Matthew, our hero in this game, we originally thought in one of the trailers that it was Noah, and then he talked, and it was clear he was talking, and he has an accent that makes it very clear it is not Noah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I don't know whether that played into it, that they wanted to make it more obvious, that this was somebody that clearly, is, got a lineage there, but he's a different person, because it's very much more a sort of contemporary urban British accent, whereas Noah's more your just classic British theatre school voice actor type of sound.
Yes. He very much sounds not dissimilar from what's Guernica's the girl's name? I'm blanking on it now. The young one.
Well, it's Gondor, which obviously that's the thing. I mean, it's like they seem to make a thing of him revealing his name at the end, the very end, but it's pretty obvious when it's okay, well. His granddad that he's so upset about getting impaled by N was called Gondor. So
right.
Who was called Gondor in the ring? Oh, that's right, one of the Van Damme. I have to as an English person. That you would ordinarily say Vandam, right?
And some of them do say Vandam.
We don't say Birmingham, we say Birmingham. Right. So I'm still it's a little bit odd to me that that's Van Damme, like Jean-Claude Van Damme, but apparently that is the way. So even though it is definitely not spelled that way, our friend Jean-Claude or the villain from North by Northwest. So it's that is a kind of a reveal, that He is essentially the founder of House Van Damme.
So, if you had really good memory and spent a bunch of time in the city in Xenoblade 3, that's the statues give away all of these people's relationships.
Yeah, it does. I remember seeing the statues, and we did talk about this,
we did
off air or on the spoiler cast or whatever it was. Some couple of When we heard about the story DLC and you think about what Torna was and then that place, the memorial in the city, you're thinking, okay, the DLC is going to tie into this. There's virtually no one. It is ultimately having finished it, it's it ends up being more direct than I even thought. Right, because it's you look back on it, it's no, those are the designs for adult Rex and adult Shulk, or old, middle-aged Shulk and Rex, they're just there in the statues, that.
And in fact, so is Glimmer, and so is who is one of the new party members. So is Matthew, and so is blanking on his name now. Nicole. Yes, it's and blanking on her name now. Matthew's sister.
Matthew's sister, right? Yeah. Niall. Yeah.
Niall, yes. Because A's not in there for obvious reasons.
No. I guess there's kind of the seventh statue that's kind of unattributed.
So they reveal who that is too.
But that is obviously because I was thinking, would that be for A? Because she's a party member. But then it could also be for Riku, who is in this.
Right.
who was also obviously Xenoblade 3 as well. See, I was expecting him to be around in this because, like, so he's just been wandering around with this sword that's made from the special metal that can cut, the flame clocks in two. Like, there's got to be something. So predictably, he is around in this.
And they've said in the past that Nopon live unknowably long lives. So it's not crazy, but there's actually a better explanation for why he's still around that they offer later. But yeah, he's around. He has one of the hammers, which he's always had, which was one of the key plot points for his character in 3, is that actually he's one of the hammer holders. And so there's a whole quest line around finding all of them.
Yeah, but I hadn't actually finished that quest line in 3. I think because that's the thing. Again, I'd not played that nearly as thoroughly as I played this.
Finding the last one really was just pulling up the community board and seeing, oh, that guy's got a hammer in his picture. Let me go find him. You do meet the guy who makes the puzzle dungeons from 3, which I thought was really funny.
Yeah, again, it was like, I don't know whether I would have. Yeah, they do help you in some cases to kind of jog your memory of this. Right. Like when he say like, oh yeah, well this won't be finished for like centuries. It's like, okay, yeah, that now I'm kind of onto this.
Yeah, it's him. It was interesting to me that they give us more context on why the city is important, and most importantly, why it wasn't absolutely destroyed early on. Like, they tell you in 3 that at one point N attacked the city. I don't know if they explicitly say N. They might just say the consoles. No, they do say N.
I think they do. I think it is explicit that it is him. Yeah. And I did like that from the point of view. So you kind of told that, the memorial and all that in the city, that's like, for that version of the city, but there was one before that was destroyed by N. And, I do kind of like the fact that it's like, well, actually, it's not just a case of like, well, N on behalf of the consoles just decided to take out the city. Like, there were extenuating circumstances. They actually had a truce going that might have held for longer. But it was actually like effectively an existential threat. Like, like if they don't kill these people right now, then Alpha Alvis, just power mad Alvis is got onto the original sort of one of the 3, the Trinity processor, kind of Aegis people, is going to just destroy everything. He just wants to, he wants the classic, Christian allusions that Takahashi is so fond of. It's just like he wants his people to put on the ark and then he's going to flood it.
Right.
But if you kill all those people beforehand, like, it's going to stop him. So that's what that was about. It wasn't just, for as much as the consoles are almost just comically evil and just, they are like Skeksis, as I always say. Like, this was more like, no, there was a reason. They actually did, this was self-preservation. This was like, even though obviously it is then going to spur this kind of lasting enmity with Matthew, and then the new city is going to get established, and that's really kind of the genesis of the movement to bring down the consoles that ultimately is successful at the end of Xenoblade 3. Like, it wasn't just for funsies. It wasn't just the sort of sadistic side of them going about.
Yeah, like, they make a big deal of the fact that since we don't see this, we see the city fall in a flashback, but we get little pieces of it for a while, and the whole thing's not revealed. But basically, Matthew and A, who he met after the city was destroyed, are essentially out wandering and pick up a reputation in Matthew's drive to get revenge of being console hunters. The only times we see normal consoles are at the beginning, when they just absolutely decimate 2 of them. And the 2 in question reveal that, oh, you are the console hunters we've been hearing about. Which, of course, because there was a truce, that wouldn't have been a thing before. And so you're right, that is the genesis of the city being like diametrically opposed to the actions of the consoles. In fact, what we learn is that just prior to that, they were effectively aligned. Like they were more or less working together against Alvis, who has. So I guess let's take a step back. So we always presumed, at least after Xenoblade 2, that Alvis is that third Ontos that had gone missing. And
that's it. I mean, when I saw the end of Xenoblade 2 and all that, that was not the first thing I was thinking of. Like, maybe that's Alvis, but definitely I saw that suggested later, and it's like, well, it does make sense. You know, the whole thing, like when I played Xenoblade 1, and you have the big reveal, you know, with Klaus doing the, you know, setting off the experiment and everything goes crazy. It's just, okay, so Alvis is like this sort of thing that was originally Klaus's computer, right?
Right.
You know, and obviously when you get to Xenoblade 2, it's like, oh, well, there were 3 processors in the Trinity processor with the computer, and, you know, Numa was one of them, and Malos was another one, and he was the third one, and he went missing. So, like, he got, whereas those 2 stayed in Allrest, he was sucked into, you know, the world of the Bionis and the Mechonis, the world of Xenoblade 1, along with, like, Klaus's assistant and, like, most of the life on the planet and, you know, like, all that stuff.
And it also explains in pretty good detail why, because if you go back to one of the reveals is that Shulk's visions are ultimately a result of Alvis and his particular powers being manifested through the Monado, because of course the Monado is the manifestation of one of these Trinity processors, because Malos had a Monado too. And so he has that power because of the connection with Alvis's core, and it makes sense then that Shulk would be able to see a lot of these things because Alvis, as the Trinity processor, could project these, as they would refer to them, possible futures, because that was part of his job.
Is he like a quantum computer?
Yeah, and so the fact that he got sucked away from the other 2 also deals with what Ontos's job was to be the mediator between Numa and I can't remember what.
It's Logos or something, isn't it? Is
Logos,
it like,
yeah.
I always think of him as Malos because that is, you know, mostly how you deal with him. But he does have a proper processor name before he became personified. Like,
yeah, his job was effectively to make decisions when the 2 of them would put forward suggestions on what to do. It was to be the morality of the system, essentially. And in this new world, that has been split into 2 entities, A and Alpha.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. It seemed to me was just like some sort of feel of like, okay, so Alvis was one thing in Xenoblade 1, but obviously the whole thing of Xenoblade 1 is you kill Zanza. You kill God, basically, right? As is often the case in such games. You kill God, and that apparently has changed Alvis. Like, it's like, okay, so he was, in a sense, like he was connected to the 2 versions of that, of Klaus. You know, you have Klaus, the sort of megalomaniacal god in Xenoblade 1 world, and you've got like old, regretful, you know, kind of, seeing the consequences of my actions Klaus in Xenoblade 2's world. And he was kind of tied into both of them. So,
yes.
But when the one is destroyed, the other is also destroyed. And so Alvis is kind of destroyed with them in a way, like that version of him. And he kind of reverts to his original programming, which is why he almost is just like Zanza now. Like, the last boss theme is Zanza's boss theme.
Right. Well, and it's even worse because so this goes back to the Ark in this case, which is, I can't remember what the name of the ship is. The big Ark that has all the people in it.
Well, Origin.
Origin, yeah. So when they built Origin, I presume this would have had to have come from the Bionis side, because they would have been the one who had access to it. They said, well, this was a processor in the original experiment. We should put him at the heart of Origin. And so what we find out is at the start of Xenoblade 3, the whole we talked about this at the time. We didn't understand how Zed comes into being and effectively fucks up what Origin is for.
No, and you don't get too much on that, do you? I mean, it's like if you were hoping for like I said, we did the spoiler cast, it's like, yeah, with Zed, like, it's just like they literally made him a concept, like that's,
yeah.
But you don't get too much like to kind of explain that more satisfactorily, but you get something about how it happens.
What you get is basically that as the processor running this thing, Alvis essentially decided to do his own thing.
At some point, it's basically like, okay, so Zed, the whole, like, the collective unconsciousness of all the people, which, when I say all the people, I mean all the people, because they've, like, essentially done a life-hold thing writ large.
For two worlds.
Yeah, for two worlds. I mean, it's unfathomably massive concept, but, the collective unconsciousness of these people have all manifested Zed, and Zed hijacks the whole thing. At some point, Ontos Alvis, in his process capacity, has kind of woken up, and so this is not what was supposed to happen. This like, netherworld of just like nothing ever changes is not what this Origin thing was built to do. So fuck this shit. Like, this needs to stop. Like, and his whole thing is, I'm going to start over. And that is what was shown in the trailer for this DLC, was it? It was just like, okay, Zed with Shulk and Rex fighting Alvis, because Alvis is like, Zed's world is not what was intended. This needs to go. But Shulk and Rex presumably are just like, well, we're not going to stand by and let everything but a few newly born people be killed. So we have to, it's the classic cartoon, team up with the bad guys when there's an even worse bad guy.
There's a much badder guy here. And the thing is, Shulk and Rex are also part of the problem. They aren't caught in the infinite cycle. They're actually more or less frozen in time. So that they make a comment about this, that there are a handful of characters, and it would appear that our Nopon friend, I'm blanking on his name now, not Ricky.
Riku. No, not Riku.
Yeah. Riku, yeah. Is possibly also caught there because he hasn't aged a goddamn minute by 1,000 years later when Xenoblade 3 happens.
Yeah, it's quite a throwaway thing. Again, comes back to what I said a little bit on the before we quote unquote ended the show, in the sense that there's some things that feel like they get skirted over a bit quickly.
Right.
Like where it is just like, I think it's not even like in a proper cutscene. It's just like text dialogue where it's kind of like, we don't know why we being Shulk and Rex, like why we didn't get absorbed into the endless cycle, but other people did. But
we're not aging. They did know they're not aging.
And so we're just kind of outside of it, like trying to do whatever they can, and they've kind of made this, kind of settlement in the hybridized ruins of Colony 9 from, Xenoblade 1's world, and, trying to kind of pick up the pieces when the city is destroyed and all this stuff's going on. But, they've lost a lot, but they don't even really know, like, why the things are the way they are. So it's kind of, that you've kind of felt like it's, one of these things where it's like, we can't really go into it too much. So we're just but people will wonder. So we're going to address it a bit, but not fully.
But that also might explain why the Queens are still around when they come through, is that they might have also not been caught in the time. Because obviously they came through at the same time. So the other thing that it also clears up is why Rex is so fucking huge compared to his photo at the end of 3. Because this is the Rex that's been in the world of Xenoblade 3 fighting for about 100 years without getting any older. So he's just gotten fucking jacked.
Gruff Rex did not stop tickling me the whole time.
It's so weird.
It is really amusing. Just like, he's so big and burly, and his voice and everything. Like it just is funny.
it is fun to see like anime protagonist hero grown up though, when it's like, okay, he sees a new anime protagonist hero and he's like, he's always seemed to be amused whenever Matthew was following what was happening. Like it seems so crazy to him that the full of youth anime protagonist could actually follow what's going on. But when you think about what Rex got put through, it's actually not that surprising considering. It is interesting that a couple people seem to be caught in the outside of time, and Rex and Shulk are not operating in conjunction with the city. They are a second free outside of the war group that is actively pulling soldiers out of it as an activity. Like that is what they do. They go out and they find soldiers from both sides, from Agnes and Keves, and remove them from the cycle and essentially recruit them into their organization. It just so happens that when the city falls, they end up rescuing a bunch of people from the city, and the two organizations
who were born outside of the cycle, so they're different in that way.
And their two organizations are effectively hybridized. So it's the descendants of that crew, either people from the city or people who were in, I can't remember what they call the organization.
The Liberators.
The Liberators, yeah. I mean, it's in the name. They are out there liberating people from the cycle.
No, it's the, it's Morpheus getting people out of the Matrix. It's,
right.
We talked about how very directly this is patterned on, the Matrix. And
exactly.
That's it. The Rex and Shulk are like Morpheus, basically. Morpheus and Trinity.
And so essentially that hybridized organization is what is the second founding of the city. And so the founders are explicitly the party members and Rex and Shulk's personal assistants, who through a series of hints, subtle and not, are revealed to be children of their friends from their respective titles.
Yeah, it's everybody's a child of somebody. Even Riku apparently is the child of one of the Noppon that was at some point a companion to Melia, yeah. So I'm not sure if that means he's Ricky's the offspring or one of the other, like the Noppon in Future Connected, which I haven't played.
He says his father traveled with her, so it's either Ricky or the male Noppon in Future Connected.
Future Connected, yeah.
So he's either Ricky's son or Ricky's grandson. Now Matthew is N's great grandson because his grandfather, whom we see get killed by N, is the child that's born when N and M escape Nia and Mio escape the first time. Noah and Mio, yeah. And so that picture of them in the hospital with the baby, that's that baby.
That's the baby, yeah. And obviously we see him as a very elderly man getting killed. That's kind of the big motivation for Matthew in the beginning.
It also explains why why M and N never interlink. Because, of course, when you interlink, you see all the memories. And I don't think Noah wants Mio to know that he killed their kid.
Yeah, their absence is kind of weird in this. It's like, I kind of get it on the one hand. Like, it's kind of, just showing us that, he kind of does all this, like, dirty work that he almost, like, protects her from in some way.
Right.
But it still kind of feels like she should be more present. I don't know whether we just don't see her because that would have been, more, it would have been more cutscenes to make. It's just kind of beyond the scope of what they had for the budget and everything for telling this story. It just kind of, I don't know.
She shows up very
she's so
briefly.
Important. That is such an important character. Like, how is she so absent? I don't know.
I actually thought her absence is telling. It's N only ever talks to Zed about what he's planning to do. And Zed basically is like, so you're going to go do this, huh? Okay. It feels very much, and we get some of this in 3, but in particular here, it feels very much that he is interested in keeping her as far away from this as he can.
It definitely is, some of that, and it fits in with that. It's just kind of, I don't know, it kind of feels like, you know, like I said, just when you've got such an important character to this saga, that, you know, kind of something, maybe just a quick scene between the two of them that solidifies the fact that he's kind of holding things back from her, you know. But, you know, like I said, I kind of get it, you know, and it still works, but it just feels a little bit conspicuous by her absence, I guess.
Yeah, it does explain though why they never interlink. Because then she'll never see it. Because, I mean, literally, if they interlink, the first thing she'd probably see is him killing their kid, which 3 spends a lot of time telling you how frayed their relationship has been since he decided.
Obviously, it doesn't end that well, or it kind of does, but, you know, certainly one phase of it doesn't end that well.
Yeah, like, they're very explicit that she is not happy about what he chose to do, and she does not like this life. And that would definitely not change her opinion if she saw that. Now, it also makes it clear that he didn't go there to destroy the city. He went there to go deal with one thing, and that is the Trinity processor.
Yeah, and then try to, you know, kind of abscond with the people of the city to, you know, and then at that point they could Alpha would destroy everything. Like that. So again, it's, you know, it is. I like the fact that it's not just like, oh, you know, obviously we know from the base game, N does lots of bad stuff. He's obviously, you know, he's a villainous character, but at least, you know, and obviously Zed is just like this abstraction of like villainy, but it kind of giving the elite, yeah, that there was like reasons why certain things fell the way they did. It may be, you know, it didn't have to go that way, but it did, you know, kind of thing. Like, I like that personally. I felt like it filled in the story and made it a little bit more kind of rich and a little bit more kind of like it hangs together.
Well, and if N or if Zed never had control of the system, like he says quite explicitly that he doesn't. That ultimately Alpha does.
Yeah, he sees the whole thing. Like the origin is out of their kind of control at this point. Like out of the console's control. So it's just like he's got it, and you know, he's just like, they kind of subdued him when everybody teamed up, but that was all it was. Like, and it's only a matter of time before he's gonna, you know, try something again. Whereas like, okay, I'm just gonna take what I need from this world and then destroy it wholesale, you know, and start my own one, which, you know, is just very, you know, very Zanza of him, you know, because that's pretty much what he's kind of reverted to. And the whole, like, basically whatever was left of the Alvis you knew has been split off into a separate person, essentially, which I guess is something that happens to these, because we had like Pyra and Mithra instead of Numa, you know, like, I guess this is just something that happens. So yeah, we get, you know, A is a party member that is, you know, very much like Alvis, but, you know, kind of, I guess it kind of is Alvis, really. It's more, you know.
She says that she is the conscience of the entity.
Yeah, she's more represents like the Alvis you knew from 1 than the thing that actually looks like Alvis does, essentially. Like, because that is just the processor, is it, at this point?
He's the logic, she's the emotion, essentially.
And the experience as well, like the kind of like the things that it learned by, you know, what happened in the first game and stuff. So, and it makes an amusing odd couple with Matthew, doesn't it? Like, that's really their bit, is just that, you know, like Alvis as was his, you know, kind of function in the first game. Like, he basically sounds like Hal from 2001, because I'm sure that was the inspiration. Because it's fucking Monolith Soft, like they've seen the movie. To say the least.
But he feels sort of a Gandalf role at a lot of times.
Yeah, also true. Yeah, until he shows up when he's, you know, quote unquote needed and stuff. But with A, she's very much that, but kind of a little bit more again, because seemingly she's like the most human part of that, kind of isolated, you know, kind of silo to its own thing. But then she's still very like logical and, you know, all this kind of stuff, you know, not very emotional. And then we've got Matthew's much more of a Rhine type of character,
Oh,
basically, isn't it? You know, he's your kind of Rhine party member at this point. And so those two kind of being, you know, kind of together is kind of like one of the kind of interplays that they make a lot out of.
My favorite part is when he and A hear a battle between the two factions, between Agnes and Kevis, and they're just kind of wandering around looking for city survivors. And Matthew's immediate response is, "Sounds like a battle." And she basically tells him, "Don't go over there. Don't." And then he goes, "I'm just going to go look. Don't get involved." "All right, I won't get involved." And she immediately knows he's going to get involved. He immediately gets involved. We meet the other two party members, whom he pulls out of it. And once he's finished pulling them out of, first he awakens the Ouroboros in them. And once he does that, the first thing he does is he breaks up their fight by picking up one of them and hurling her directly at the other one and saying, "Cut it out." And he turns and looks at A, kind of like, "Can you believe these two?" And her response is just like, "Oh, great, there's 3 of them now." It's like, oh, even she's like, so she can even make jokes. And she's recognizing, great, I've got 3 lunatics to deal with. Because the 2 people they meet are Glimmer, who is the daughter of Rex, and I guess she would, I mean, she behaves more like
Mithra. The voice is more like Mithra, but she's got the red hair of Pyra.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know necessarily how that works.
Yeah, I don't know which. I assume it's Pyra because they went with the red.
Glimmer, the flame power, the red hair. But there's some Mithra in her as well.
She definitely has more of Mithra's persona. And then we meet Nicole, who is Shulk and blanking on her name now. Fiora, yeah, Shulk and Fiora's kid. But these two aren't the ones that were born to them because that happened back in the old world. So
presumably they were born in the old world. They were whatever they were, whatever age they were when it sort of happened, when the merger happened, and then they were absorbed into the Matrix, essentially.
Unlike their fathers, they got pulled in.
Yeah, because obviously it's like with Noah himself, right? The very opening of Xenoblade 3, he's a kid,
right?
He's at the Alchemoth or whatever, and then it happens, and he is absorbed into it. Like presumably that just happened to them exactly the same way in their sort of respective worlds,
right? And so it becomes an issue because, of course, the other 2 party members are their fathers. Now, 100+ years removed from the last time they saw them. And they can't tell them this, but it very much affects them. Like, there's a ton of scenes of just the 2 of them basically being old men commiserating with each other that they're dealing with their own kid and that they can't do anything about it. There's a lot of scenes between Rex and Glimmer where she's kind of put off by how familial he's being with her. And it's just like, oh, he's still terrible with women, even when they're his own daughter. He's awful at this. Now, the one thing that's funny here, so the non-party members that hang out with you are either the son of one of the Napon, or they are the daughter.
Everybody's someone's kids.
Everybody in the party except...
It's very much like, I think the narrative sort of philosophy at work here is very much like not going to be people who are okay with Rey's parents being nobody in the new Star Wars movies. It's like, well, they've got to be somebody, haven't they?
well, with one exception. There's one exception to this, and it's Noah.
That's true. The characters, that's what, like, the characters of Xenoblade 3 for the most part are just like people, right? Like, I mean, I guess Mio is the one where it's like, well, we kind of suspect she is connected to Nia.
Right. I mean, and that would make sense. She's about the same age as Glimmer. So presumably, I mean, I don't know how many cycles they're on, but presumably that's daughter number 3.
But the point is that, you know, kind of a lot of the Xenoblade 3 characters are just, you know, kind of people that are not connected to the heroes of the first games. And, you know, that I think, like I said, that's the dichotomy here of like the base game is like, you know, we want kind of new characters for people to bond with. They don't have to feel like, oh, but I don't know this character from before. Like, so they could just fully bond with them the same as anybody else who's playing the game, whether they're an established series fan or not. Whereas with this, it's like, no, everybody's somebody, pretty much, you know, and, you know, it's all got to kind of tie back to, you know, things that people know. As that's, you know, it's very much, you know, kind of a fan service kind of, you know, project. It just feels like kind of like, okay, we're going to give you some stuff, you know, we're going to kind of reward you for knowing this stuff. We're going to reward you for caring about it, for following it over, you know, if you go back to, you know, when the first one came out in Japan, you know, it's 13 years or whatever it's been. You know, and so that's really the point of like why so many characters is just got some sort of connection to someone. You know, that was very much kind of like, you know, with the Shulk and Rex each have a kind of protege, and like Rex's protege, Linker, you just look at her and straight away it's like, oh, it's Pandoria from Xenoblade 2. Right. So straight away it's like, okay, so this is the kid of Pandoria and Zeke.
Yeah, and we get more of that. Like there's this is the deep lore. This is my favorite. There's a quest about it's Pandoria's birthday, and they're gonna make her favorite food. And if you go look at what her favorite food is, not Pandoria, literally Linka. If you look at the quest for Linka's favorite food, if you go back to Xenoblade 2 and pull up Pandoria's favorite food, it is in fact this dish they talked about her mother making for her all the time.
The dish in question, yeah. So, but what that did then, because because Pandoria's got a very distinctive kind of look with the green hair and all that, so that kind of gave that away. Now, a counterpart for Shulk at first, I was like, well, it's not as obvious, but once you realise who and what Linka is. With the other character, it's like, well, she's called Panacea, which is a cure-all. Right. And who would be an equivalent parent on Shulk's side, you know, compared to Pandoria and Zeke on Rex's side? It's like, what, Charlotte, because she was the healer. You know, so, right. And you look at her and it's like, well, yeah, you know, the hair, the eyes and all that. So it's like, okay, yeah, that's so. I don't even really have to look this up. Like, she's going to be Charlotte's kid, you know, and then, like, again, you get text that effectively sort of confirms this in a kind of, you know, just text dialogue kind of thing. I mean, it's a funny little bit with Linka, where it's kind of like, oh yeah, you know, she says something like, oh yeah, I always wanted to do this because my dad would tell me about all the adventures that he would be on with my mother or whatever, and Rex is like, yeah, about that. He doesn't get a chance to finish. It's basically just like he's tempted to presumably correct some horse shit that Zeke had talked in the past.
And one of the things that you go find for a member of the Liberators is a book they lost, and it's a book that's clearly fucking written by Zeke, because it's called like The Legend of the Zekinator.
Oh, it's like, my God! I didn't get this.
Yeah, it's one of the quests. It's a quest. You probably just didn't read all the flavor text on the quest, because it's like, go find this book I lost. But if you read the text, the book title is like The Legend of the Zekinator.
Oh my God! I must have just missed that. I'm quite certain I would have done the quest.
It's like, oh my! All of them. Oh yeah, you had to if you've completed the community. It's like, oh my God, are you fucking kidding?
I do love the way and then what the idea of going back to the statues is that, you know, you've got statues of middle-aged, you know, Shulk, middle-aged Rex that don't represent the fact that they founded the sort of current version of the city, but that their proteges did, and they wanted to honour their mentors, right? So that basically that means that one of the key houses, you know, the nobility effectively of the city could be referred to as House Zeke, you know?
Yes.
It's not. They have another name, but it's, oh God.
Or House von Genbu, I believe was his last name.
Yeah,
God. Like, the idea that he's I mean, he was a prince, so I guess it's fair. But it's, that the fact that those two idiots who couldn't even care for a turtle had a child is terrifying.
Yeah.
And that she's apparently been 18 for like 100 years at this point too, which...
Yeah, and ultimately have been sort of effectively kind of Rex's kid for a lot longer than she was theirs,
probably
I
for
guess.
the best.
But Rex kind of... That's the other thing, is the fact that in a way... They did lose their children, and then these two were kind of like their surrogate child, and obviously they kind of lost their spouses as well. I mean, although there's an asymmetry there, because of course we kind of led to think, well, okay, with Pyra and Mithra, they kind of had to give it up for the team, right? They had to go back to the crystal to be part of the Trinity processor in Origin for it to work.
Right.
But what would have happened to Fiora is less clear. Like, would she have passed away? Would she have been absorbed into the Matrix? Like, what happened? Is a young version of her running around out there fighting, in the war?
So for a minute, when we first saw Glimmer, that was my thought of, oh God, is this young Pyra? Is he dealing with the fact he's seeing that he's now the old man here? Oh, is this like weird? And then she talked, and I'm like, no, that's not Pyra. I'm like, no, that's not Pyra. There's too much Rex in this behavior. It's very humanizing for these two to actually have them go through that experience, especially because you see both of their parents in them. Like, especially in Nickel, he's very kind of timid. Like Shulk was a little timid at the start of Xenoblade.
No, it reminds you. It's just like it's sort of surprisingly effective. Like I said, in some ways, I feel like it had more of an effect when the memories for me of the original Xenoblade are quite dim at this point. But evidently they were still there when it's like, no, this is the start of Xenoblade Shulk. But with his mother's eyes, basically, like it does work. It does make you feel like, this could be their kid, obviously they make a lot of the kind of the mechanical, the enthusiasm for mechanical things and all that kind of stuff. So, I say at times it's kind of like, well, does everybody have to be like directly related to somebody or this, that, and the other? But like I said, this is the place for that stuff. Like, they restrain from that in the base game, so it's kind of natural. It's just all right, we'll throw that all in here. And, you could enjoy, thinking about that, thinking about those characters you remember from, the other games and how this is their kind of legacy.
The other thing, though, is it gives us an understand, and we talked about this, like, we didn't understand how the city could be founded, because everybody would die. Like, so even if you took people out, like, how would you get them back in? Well, now we know. Because they would be, essentially they'd run out of cycles, because getting freed from the clock didn't end the cycle for you.
No, exactly. That's the whole, it's a core part of the core event of the, of Xenoblade 3 is the fact that, yes, Mio has been freed, but she's still going to die.
Right. And now we know.
We know that would, so yeah, how was it that you could have people live long enough outside to kind of start this whole thing?
Right. And now we know there were people who were outside it to begin with. And so they're probably the ones who took care of that first generation, because they would have had to been the ones to take them out of the cycle. So the Liberators are probably ultimately the start of the first city, because they pulled people out. And then as it went on, or as it cycled around, the city became self-sustaining.
And they tried to build a second one, and that presumably is where, was another sort of flashpoint for like, okay, the consoles are like, no, they're not having a second one. Blow that shit up. That's another, and that's a key plot point, because it creates the kind of the dismay in Matthew's sister that is going to be exploited by Alvis, Alpha, to, kind of use her as a vector for distribution. She's so kind of despondent, that this is the kind of awful stuff that happens, that she is sympathetic to the idea of, no, we should just start all over. All of this should go, because it's all just too terrible. It can't be saved. It's too crap.
All the old ones are responsible for this, which would be the people who are currently in Origin, the ones from the other worlds, the people who have been in the cycle, and then this handful of liberators who have been living since the dawn of this time. Like, it's really the people in the city who are bred and clean. They don't have the original sin of their host worlds. And so everybody else has to go. And we can start over with people who aren't from the two worlds, because everybody else who's alive at that point is ultimately from the two worlds.
From the moment they merged,
right?
And only that moment, So that's the point. Is like, okay, these are novel people, that the act genuinely novel. They aren't just all from that one moment. And I'm going to take them and I'm going to start over, and that's why they have to go. That's why Mobius is like, no, you can't have them because otherwise, then we're all dead.
Right? They serve a purpose in the grand scheme of everybody. Which is why I guess they let them have the one city. And it also, that when they go to the second city as it's been destroyed to go see presumably their friends, that's when she finds the One Ring. I mean the core that ultimately ends up consuming her. Alvis conspires, or Alpha conspires, for her to find his core.
Yeah, I was a little bit unclear on that. It's like, is that meant to be taken literally, or like, was it because surely his core would have been in Origin, right, the whole time, physically? So is that meant to be like a metaphor for he's like, kind of establishing a connection with her, and she's, she feels she's finding this thing.
She very much seems to find it physically, and there's a scene of her.
That is the way it looks, but I'm just wondering, well, surely if they put him, which they did, in the machine, and obviously we're told in this, he's got control of the machine, the consoles don't. Isn't it still there the whole time? Isn't it just?
Unless he can move about and he doesn't have to
maybe
physically
it's like a
be present.
projection. You know what I mean? Like it's.
He can create anything, so maybe he just created another processor.
It's like a projection that he can kind of that's emblematic of this idea of she's bonding with him, in a way, and obviously the other half of him has a kind of equivalent core crystal as an earring.
Right.
So there's well, how many of these things are there?
Well, Glimmer's got one.
Glimmer's got one by virtue, a cruciform core crystal thing, by virtue being the child of one of those, yeah.
And and there's one in each of Matthew's gloves, so presumably they've been splitting.
Yeah, also true. So you got it's there's lots to kind of keep track of, and by virtue of not having seen everything, there's a bunch of stuff that's that might make more sense, or kind of if I'd actually was really, really up on this stuff. But even with some of that being true, I still felt like I could follow the broad strokes more than well enough and enjoy some of the details I did remember.
So to wrap it, there's one sequence we have to talk about, which is right near the end, right before we kill right before we kill Alvis, or Alpha. Alpha so Nael, under his control, has taken all of the people of the city into Origin, and they're in this simulation that he's created for them that appears to be Earth, slightly beyond modern Earth.
No, it's kind of jarring, is it? Because it is very much you see these characters, and then it's just they've been plopped in almost. There's some futurism in there, as you mentioned, especially what appears to be the base of the low orbit station that becomes the World Tree in Xenoblade 2. But it's almost like Blue Velvet, David Lynch, that kind of 50s perfect, it's like too perfect Americana kind of thing going on, which obviously that is, very much, I think, part of what's going on. It is too perfect, it's not, it doesn't hold up to scrutiny, ultimately. That is, part of what plays out in the scene kind of thing. But yeah, it's like, oh, well, this is, again, you don't know how literally to take it, because it isn't like, we sort of suggested it's based on memory, that right. Alvis having been made as
but it's not real.
As part of the Trinity processor, it would have been something that it would have access to data on that time of right. When that world did exist. But this is not necessarily an exact faithful reproduction of that time, because the whole point is there's an agenda. It's right. like, oh, this is the way things could be if you go along with my plan. So it's made to presumably like it's kind of nicer than it actually was.
Right, and Alpha, or A, of course, reveals the reality of what became of that world soon thereafter, which is, of course, the war over the Trinity processor and how the devastation that came afterwards, and then the world split. So the other notable thing is there's a radio broadcast where they're talking about colony ships leaving Earth, which has not been part of the lore of what was going on in Xenoblade 1 and 2.
The thing is, though, I had the subtitles on because a lot of the time, I mean, it's a freak thing, really, that I was able to get through this as fast as I can. Just total perfect storm in terms of that weekend, the draft is on. NFL draft, that time is carved out for me every year, right? And then all of a sudden this game drops in your lap that's just perfect to play while that's going on. Because like with actual live sport, baseball's pretty good, for playing RPGs. Light hockey, not so much, because it's constant action, but the draft is like godlike. It's divine for play because it's mostly auditory, and it's just sort of happening. So it's the perfect. So it's just like, I've got all, it's like 4 hours the first day, like 5 hours the next day, and another like 5 to 6 hours the last day. And it's just like, all came just like, this is the perfect time to just play an absolute shitload of this game while this is all happening. So I did end up just going on a real run with it that I wouldn't have necessarily expected, but obviously did mean that the sound wasn't always going to be on and stuff, which is a shame, but otherwise I wouldn't be getting through it. Yeah, so I had the subtitles on, for everything, and that really helped, I think, with the radio scene, because I don't know whether you'd pick up on all of this. Like it's in the background. It's not like screaming at you. But
there's two conversations going on at the same time.
Yeah, and one is meant to clearly more important than the other, in the context of the story. But when you just see it written out, Project Exodus. Yeah. It's like, okay, well, they're going there. Like, they go, obviously, we covered this in the Xenoblade 3 spoiler cast. Like, I recounted how when I got to the end of 2, and you have a kind of the retelling of the moment that Klaus sets everything off. And there's like, like a battle, as you mentioned, part of that war going on, which you didn't see when they told this story the first time. It was like, oh god, is this Xenoblade X? Like, is this like the aliens or whatever that were coming to wipe out the Earth? Is that what we're seeing? And then it wasn't, seemingly, but so I've always had this part of my brain that's ready to believe that they would tie Xenoblade X into it. But then when they actually just spell out Project Exodus, it's like, oh, no, this isn't just me. They're saying it. It's right there.
Yeah, and it's also a little bit of a callback to stuff that happens in Xenosaga, but they don't call that Project Exodus in Xenosaga. Like, I know people are really keying in on this being Saga, but that's the thing, it's because that Saga fans trying to go there. But
yeah, well, I mean, there's one thing that I did that because I have no experience with Xenosaga at all, and no real experience with Xenogears, although I've heard about that and I've heard the soundtrack of it a fair bit. And there was one thing that kind of about that kind of made me think, because I've seen reference that that maybe some of this stuff is reference to Xenosaga like content and theories about what that could mean. But one detail that the actual end credits song, I was listening to it and it's like the voice was familiar, but I didn't know what it was from. And then they sort of discovered that apparently the vocalist is Joanne Hogg, who did the theme song for Xenogears. So, like, they went back and got someone that hadn't even, like, done any vocals for a Xenoblade game before. But because I've heard the soundtrack, the voice did still kind of resonate with me. And that put it in a little bit of a different light, in terms of, obviously a lot of this is like the end credits is like you got scenes from 1, 2, and 3, and it's like, okay, you're kind of like, this like trilogy of games that it's recapping to some extent. But when it's like you're going back 25 years to Xenogears, like to get that person back to do the song, it put it in a different light for me. I was almost like more like, I was kind of like, okay, we're going to kind of tying this off, and future Xeno games won't have like this whole Klaus thing as like the original sin that kind of everything traces back to anymore. It'll kind of tie that off. Like, that's what I was thinking. But in the context of like getting someone back from that far ago for something that's not even really like technically the same series, it just for a minute, it was like it took on a bit more of a sad dimension. It was almost like, is Takahashi retiring or something? Like this seems a bit too final than I'm comfortable with.
Well, and they do reference it, the doctor they reference is a character from Xenogears. So maybe it is. Maybe this is just like a way of saying, like, I'm finished with Xeno. I'm going to put references to all of it in there just for...
Yeah, I really don't know. To be honest, like, the first time through it, it didn't really... I didn't see it that way. I just saw it as like, we want to have a feeling of finality of like, this thing that all the games refer back to is kind of, of Klaus and, all that, Zanza and all that, like, it is completely over. Like, the effects of it and all that is kind of all tied off. And, it won't be this, like, underpinning for, like, a future game. Like, we can kind of, like, move on from it, kind of thing. That's what I was thinking it would be before we started the game. And that's kind of how I took the ending. But then the first time through, but then after digesting this whole thing of like, we've slipping in references to all the Xeno games and getting that original vocalist, it's just like, on the one hand, maybe is just yet another layer of like, hey, for anybody who's been with me the whole way, all 25 years, like, this is for you, but that doesn't mean anything more than that. Maybe that's just it, but for me, it took on a level of finality, which is kind of ironic considering a lot of that song is about the future. Right. It just took on a level of finality that was like, that's more final than I was expecting, I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, like that's my take, is that all these references are really just like, hey, I see you, more than they are, I'm tying. Because like, even if you say this is the Project Exodus of Xenoblade X, it's being very much billed in this news broadcast. So isn't this an exciting thing for the future? Whereas we're told explicitly in Xenoblade X, this is a no, you have to go, everything's about to get fucked.
Yeah, and also the the whole thing of like, well, with these aliens that like destroy the world and pursue the Exodus ships and all this stuff, which is not what we see. We hear about this all, these factions, these factions warring over the conduit, which is basically a monolith from 2001, right? Like, it's analogous to that, but they find it in Africa instead of on the moon. But it's like an alien artifact, something that a greater intelligence kind of left for us to find, because again, when it's Xenoblade or Xeno anything, presumably, like it all comes back to 2001, like that. But there was one thought I had about that ending with reference to Project Exodus, which is, again, when we first talked about the end of the Xenoblade all those years ago, my sort of summation of it was, it's Planet of the Apes plus 2001. It's not only is it the idea of, becoming, like the way that Zanza, Klaus became a higher being, the way that the end of 2001 is like the Star Baby or whatever, the astronaut.
Right.
Played by Keir Delay, becomes a higher form of life after it's gone through this process, these sort of breadcrumbs that this higher intelligence left for us. But it's also, it was Earth all along, like you didn't know it was Earth, but then you get to the final battle and it's like, isn't this our solar system? And it's like, yeah, which of course is, the end of Planet of the Apes. But this thing of like, okay, we have the radio broadcasts that tell us about ships leaving the world that will soon get fucked up by Klaus's experiment. And then the end credits show something coming back.
Right.
And it's like, that basically is a Planet of the Apes scenario, isn't it? Of just like, well, Chuck Heston leaves the Earth and everything's normal, and he comes back and it's like, what the fuck is this? And he just assumes it's not Earth, obviously. But like that, there's also like the more recent Planet of the Apes movies, where obviously it's dealing with the fall of the planet, so you're not going to see the Chuck Heston bit.
Right.
But they have a little reference in there of like, somebody's going on a mission to Mars just before everything goes to shit. And so it's like, presumably one day they're going to come back after some kind of, temporal vortex or something, and they're going to be, Chuck Heston, essentially. So it's like, that's where I was going, seeing that final image of the light heading to the planet is like, something is going to come back and be just like so fucking baffled by
what the hell. I mean, it is also possibly an allusion to the scene of Cosmos arriving in that series, but like,
yeah, I've got no context for that at all. So
I would like, but again, these are the same people. They had seen those movies at that point as well.
Oh,
but yeah, I do like the idea of the Xenoblade X crew has figured out the situation with their bodies, which is a whole different issue. Has somehow managed to get off Mira, which definitely does not want them to do that. The planet has made it quite clear it has a plan for them, and it is on this fucking planet. And has somehow managed to make it back to the planet they thought got destroyed, and they've arrived at what the fuck is going on here?
This is brilliant. And then they get there and it's like, what the fuck is this? That idea is intensely amusing.
Does that mountain look like a whale?
I would really enjoy that as a game premise, frankly. I would like have, because, I mean, I guess that's the other thing you got to say about that very, very at the post, kind of just after the credits, is that we see the worlds drifting apart. So,
right.
And it's kind of like the way they do the imagery is very much like, as they drift apart, it kind of forms the Ouroboros symbol, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But then they kind of drift apart. But then they flash and they're one again. So it's like... this made me feel kind of stupid for a moment, because it's like, okay, well, they did definitely, like, the whole point of the end of 3 was they were separating again. Like, that was the point.
Right.
But the suggestion here is clearly at some point, and, given that we're watching this from a sort of cosmic perspective, goodness knows how many ages this is down the line, but at some point they do reunify, and they're one planet again.
They're quite explicit about the fact that the worlds are aware of the fact they are not supposed to be split. I mean, they quite literally say the worlds conspired to reunify. Presumably,
they characterize it as like yearning to be together, but I assume it's just like, well, what happened to them was unnatural, and it's just like a kind of, it's almost like gravity, It's just like, well, that is what there's meant to be. They just, they were split apart by an unnatural thing, and they're kind of just attempting to revert to their natural state. But if they do, it will destroy everything that exists. So we kind of have to manage that at the very least.
And
with Origin.
but presumably Origin, I guess then you could argue, was only temporary. That like ultimately it's going to do it again. Like this is what they want. Now, we already had enough time for literally the evolution of life on in the world of Xenoblade 2 because life didn't come over there.
No,
So,
it was kind of like reconstructing it. Like that's the whole point of like the Cloud Sea and all that is like it's trying to heal the world and like kind of re-engineer everything from data essentially.
And that's also why Klaus is the architect. That's why that's the more somber and more emotionally connected to his world Klaus, who doesn't like the suffering of his world, whereas the other Klaus is
he's the guy that actually had to live with the consequences of his actions, whereas in the other world he's just kind of born a god, essentially, isn't he?
Born a god in a cool fantasy world, whereas this Klaus saw literally nothing and had to create. I mean, he created the land. Like that, there was nothing there. He was literally alone. That's it. That Klaus has been alone since the dawn of time, and so he is a very different creature than the Klaus of the other world. But maybe they flash back. But I mean, there is also at the very end of Xenoblade 3, you do hear Mio's theme play.
As I said in the spoiler cast, it's kind of like it's very much like it got the flavour of it was all a dream or was it type of thing in terms of like they've separated, but maybe not completely. Like there's a chance, like but how that plays into just seeing this sort of cosmic view of them at some point. They drift apart, but eventually they come back together. Like, how long is that? I have no idea. And how is that happening? I have no idea. But it's like, at some point, they will come back together, and then we see this unidentified object coming towards that world at some point, and whatever that could kind of mean, I guess is fun for everyone to kind of think about. But it definitely, I think the ending of it all kind of it felt more satisfying than the ending of the original Xenoblade 3 game, I think.
I agree.
That whole thing of kind of that slightly like it was all a dream or was it type of ending. I don't know. It just felt a little bit kind of anticlimactic, really. And as I said, I always said it was kind of thematically muddled in the sense that the whole thing, was about fighting against these sort of agents of inertia. But the upshot of it all was we got things back to the way they were. just seemed bizarre. Whereas in this game, it's very much it's more like a nice triangulation. We've got the Mobius who represent the inertia, just like everything has to stay the way that it is. These old like vampiric creatures just feeding off the young, and then on the other extreme we've got Alvis who's just like that. Everything's got to change. We are starting all that, and your crew with Matthew at the front of it represents the middle way of like, no, we don't forget the past, we don't destroy the past, but we don't let it rule us either. We forge our own path to the future. Like that felt much more of a kind of coherent, like with the general themes of the series kind of resolution than we made things the way they were. It's just even though that plays out afterwards in the chronology of the fiction, this feels like a more apt finishing point.
Correct. All right. Well, I think we need to wrap up now because we've gone way past 10 minutes.
Well, it was there. It was always apt to happen.
Yeah,
there's a lot going on here. We're not going to stop thinking. I don't think we're going to stop thinking about it. We're not going to stop talking about it altogether either.
But it's late or early, as the case may be. So I need to get some kind of sleep, and I think we could probably keep going, but I think we pretty well covered it. So, Greg, thanks for hanging out with me a little bit after everybody else. A lot after everybody else finished recording. And if you made it to the end of this marathon of an episode, I hope you also enjoyed Future Redeemed like we did.
Oh yeah, no, it really just like kind of like I said, so many things had to line up for me to enjoy it at this speed, and kind of just like they said, it really did. It was a trip, to trigger some of those memories from, 12 years ago for me. Like the big one, I think. And there were moments like this in the core game as well, I have to say. But I think probably like more dense in this one, into like go into the lookout spot in Colony 9. Like, when you kind of walk in that path, kind of up the stairs towards it, and it's like, oh yeah, I remember this. I remember walking this same route early in the game, in the original Xenoblade 12 years ago. It just kind of brings it home how long it's been. You know what I mean? How much are they? Obviously they're feeling their age because they're God knows how old. But,
yeah.
It's just like, I was a lot younger when I played the first
I had
one.
both my arms when we did this the first time.
Oh, there is. I do love the idea of people playing this out of context, like some of the lines, some of the moments, just Shulk very matter-of-factly says at one point, when I turned down the opportunity to be a god,
yeah.
I just love the thought of somebody reading that out of context, like, what?
Well, the fact that nobody even reacts to it, like he's talked about this 100 times. Like, we know
he just keeps bringing it up all the time. I had the chance to be a god, It does bring to mind Bill Murray in Ghostbusters, but like paraphrasing, he's like, when you have the opportunity to be a god, you say yes.
Rex is just like, I just got to have three magic wives. I don't know what you're talking about. Jeez.
No, but I think it was John Redden when he reviewed it. I think had a similar sentiment of just like, it's a nice like kind of game unto itself, and it's a really kind of more satisfying resolution for but Xenoblade 3 itself and the games that led up to it than the base game left it off. So I'd say, even though I had reasonable expectations coming in, I think it did somewhat exceed those, actually, on those two fronts.
I'd agree. All right. Well, I think that's it. We done?
Yeah, we are. That's it.
All right. Well, on that, bye, everybody.
Bye again.